All right, we're going live now. All right, you're here. You should be able to hear me, but we got a few seconds left. So,
yeah, I can still hear.
All right, later in a second. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Underneath podcast. I am really excited to live stream today with a dear old friend of mine, been friends for a number of years now, and finally cajoled him to get back in the saddle and come on. And we're going to talk some current events and especially the whole UAP thing. So without further ado, Steve, welcome to the show, man. How you doing?
Thanks for the cajoling, Cale.
Yes, well, it's one of the things I do relatively well, though. You've been very good, very, very able at keeping away, but this is great. It's time. You and I talk so much offline and online, I suppose, but I figured, I was looking back, I think it was 4 years ago, roughly speaking.
Man, was it that long?
Yeah. It was literally the week. No, I'm sorry. Yes, it was. I'm pretty sure it was the week of the last presidential campaign. Either was leading right into it or was right after. For some reason, I think it was right before it. But at any rate, then, of course, you are at 1 Peter 5. You're still running the show over there. And there's been lots of water under the bridge, so to speak. And so you've moved a couple of times. You keep writing, which is great. You can click Steve's stuff in the link for his Substack. But, man, in that time, you sort of have switched frames a little bit. And now you have been following this passion even before you left 1 Peter 5. We have been talking about the whole alien thing, the UAPs, this whole sort of side of things that has really percolated in pretty major ways. So yesterday, following your lead, you alerted me to the fact that there was going to be a congressional hearing. I believe it was a House hearing on
the oversight
UAP,
committee.
Oversight committee from Nancy Mason. So, at any rate, I checked it out. You checked it out. I mean, what's going on?
I mean, it was a long hearing. I think it went on a couple of hours. It's the third or fourth hearing like this that we've had in Congress in the last year or so. And let me back up a little bit and get into why I'm interested in this at all. Because a lot of people know that, I kind of unceremoniously left Catholicism after getting fed up. And I stay kind of close to the topic because my whole life was invested in it. But people think that this is, my new alternate religion. It's really not. So when I was a kid, I was fascinated by this stuff. I grew up in a house that, was full of science fiction and comic books. My dad was a big nerd. He was into all that stuff. We watched X-Files growing up. We watched Star Trek. We watched all the things, just Star Wars. I actually used to joke that my parents used Star Wars family planning because they were pregnant with me during the first one. So I was there technically.
Yes, you were there.
Because it came out a few months before I was born.
Right.
And then they were pregnant with my brother Matt for The Empire Strikes Back. They were pregnant with my sister Erin for Return of the Jedi. So I was at the theater for all three of those. But I mean, my milieu growing up was very sort of science fiction adjacent. And then when I was a kid going to school, I would just go to the library and I would get out books about UFOs. And I was fascinated by the idea of, hey, maybe there really is something out there. I used to love going out and looking up at the stars and just wondering, and I think I was in like 6th grade and I read these books on like Project Blue Book and all these different things. And then I read this book by Whitley Strieber, which I never finished.
Right.
It's called Communion, and it's about his alien abduction experiences. And it scared the crap out of me. Like, I dropped that book one night. I'm like, I'm never picking this up again. I'm never looking at this stuff again. This is evil. It's weird. Like, I didn't know what to make of it.
How old were you?
I was probably 12. So yeah, maybe not even, maybe 10 or 11, because I think it was actually before my family moved back to New York from Connecticut. I'm not 100% sure.
It's an interesting moment, honestly, in everything that I've read about sort of adult imagination and sort of adult philosophy and kind of adult frame of references. They'll tell you that those are really deeply imprinted between the ages of 10 and 12. Like there's something really significant about that chunk of time. Interesting that both of us moved at that same time in terms of our ages.
Yeah, I moved before the summer of my 12th birthday. Yeah. My birthday is in November. It was just this week. So it's like we moved from Connecticut back to upstate New York, which is where I was born.
That's right.
And so it was around that time that I was reading about that stuff, and then I dropped it. And then as I progressed through high school and I got more and more into religion and I got more into evangelization and missionary work and all this stuff, like the UFO thing just kind of dropped off for me. I just stopped thinking about it. I still loved science fiction, but I just treated it as science fiction, and I left it alone. And then in 2017, I remember actually it was a Sunday, and we had just left Mass, and my wife was in the store for something, and I was sitting in the van with the kids.
Is that in Arizona?
Out in Arizona. And I'm reading on my phone the news, which I always do. Yeah, of course. And I come across this New York Times story. I think it was called Glowing Auras and Dark Money, the Pentagon's search for UFOs or something like that. I'm like, what? Sure. It was a front page story, right? So I read this thing, and the main figure in this article is this guy by the name of Luis Elizondo, who headed up an organization at the Pentagon referred to in the article as ATIP, the Advanced Aerospace Technology Information Program, or something like that. Their acronyms are ridiculous.
Yeah, I know they love the acronyms.
And he quit the Pentagon to advocate for public disclosure of the fact that the Defense Department knew about UFOs. Military was having encounters with UFOs. They had all this information on it, but it was being firewalled and sequestered and kept secret and all this stuff. And he was like, this is going on. It's a threat to our national defense. It's an invasion, with impunity into our aerospace. Like we can't, our planes can't catch these things. They can't stop them. Like there's nothing that we can do about this. And at the same time, he had gotten declassified 2 or 3 videos that had come from cockpit gun camera, FLIR, forward looking infrared camera footage from F/A-18 Super Hornets, of several different events. One was called the Tic Tac event, which is happened off the USS Nimitz off the coast of San Diego in 2004. Right. Then there was the Go Fast video and the gimbal videos, both of which I think were filmed off the coast of Virginia later, like 2015, 2016, 2017, somewhere around that. And these videos were the ones that he was able, now we know because he's written a book about this, to get declassified, to get brought through the Department of Defense review program. It's called DOPSR, that they have to look at everything, make sure that there's no secrets that they can't let out. And so this reignited this interest that I had in the UFO topic, because I was like, this isn't just people saying that they got abducted somewhere. These are trained military pilots flying $20 million jets who have to be psychologically fit, and they're like, we're running into stuff that exceeds any technology we've ever seen. We don't have it. The enemy doesn't have it. We don't know what it is.
Yeah,
and
it breaks through the noise a little bit, right? Because from in my experience, we had been, and this is something we can get into later on, but we have been pretty well conditioned and primed to essentially dismiss this stuff precognitively, right? It's like and we know now that there have been campaigns funded, right, to make sure that the public, when they hear things about UFOs or now UAPs or aliens or anything, that we play the music, do 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 do, or we play we play the sounds, we play these things, and we
the little green men, poorly animated in CGI,
right, and we sort of immediately take this information and we sort of put it right over there, and we say, okay, goodbye. Now I'm curious, why did this sort of break through that? Why did you sense signal in that moment, whereas maybe 5-10 years prior to that, you would have been able to just simply properly file that away into the trash receptacle?
Well, I mean, I just spent the previous, so 2017, the previous 3 years in a very journalistic frame, running 1 Peter 5, looking into and investigating stories about Vatican corruption and church politics and all this stuff. And you begin to develop an instinct for credibility, for, you know, where the truth is and all that kind of stuff. And I've always been pretty good at sniffing it out.
But just the audience should know that whenever I have questions, Steve is the first person that I send a link to. Like, Steve, I need you to smell this one, because I'm not.
Yeah, I've got a pretty finely honed BS detector. A lot of it's innate. I don't really know how it works, but it always helped me to try to stay, you know, stay clear of the stories that were mostly rumor and conjecture, and actually stick to the stuff, you know, that was meaty and substantive, right? So I'm reading this thing, and I can clearly see that this guy Elizondo has credentials.
Okay.
The videos are very obviously military videos. You know, it hit that standard of evidence that you typically didn't see prior to 2017 when it came to UFO videos. You know, and now they proliferate like crazy online, and they could be CGI, or they could be, you know, Chinese lanterns. They could be whatever, but everybody just throws stuff out there, and you have no idea of the provenance, and so it's difficult. You know, we could talk later about Diana Pasulka, but I mean, in her book, in her second book, she talks about the fact that there's this whole group on Facebook of professional videographers and stuff that literally go through these videos and look for tells of this has been manipulated, this is artificial, you know, these ones are real, these ones are fake. And that's all they do, is they kind of debunk the fake ones. But there's so many of them out there now, but these clearly were not. And that's where it broke
How
through.
has that been? Sorry to interrupt, but to that end, you know, classically, we're putting this in a classic frame. Classically, that would have been pretty easy to look for the tells of augmentation and alteration. In your sense, how much has that changed in the past 18 months with the advent of these various AI, CGI, GPT rendering machines? Is that
so? What's weird
has that
about
made the job more difficult?
So I don't think it has yet. I think it will. I think AI video is just now, after probably, you know, a year to 18 months, is finally starting to. It's not Will Smith eating his fingers as he tries to consume a bowl of pasta. You know, it's not these nightmare fuel videos that you were seeing in the early days of AI, which was, you know, a year or two ago. I mean, it's not that long ago. They're becoming much more clear, but they have a certain characteristic to them. They're too shiny, they're too polished, they're too obviously AI. It's very easy, for the most part, for people who work with this stuff a lot, with image generation. I mean, I've had a subscription to Midjourney since it first came out. I produce dozens of images a month. You start to develop an eye for, this looks super hyper realistic, but almost in a way that's the other end of the uncanny valley. The uncanny valley used to be it's almost human, but it's not quite human. But now it's like it's superhuman, and it's too much.
That's
it's
exactly
like too perfect.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I love that.
And so I don't think that makes a difference. But I would say the last decade and a half, CGI techniques that are Hollywood quality have been accessible to the average person who knows what they're doing, who has access to the software, who has, you know, like Blender and 3D modeling and all this stuff. It's not that hard to make a fake video if you know what you're doing. And so it gets harder in that sense for people to be able to tell the difference between a real video and not. And especially because most UFO videos look like crap. And there's a reason that they do.
Right.
Like, I invite anybody who thinks, oh, wow, why are they all so blurry? Why are they all so far away? Well, take your phone outside at night. Wait for a plane to fly over and try to film it.
Right.
Just wait, like a 747 coming. Like, if you live near an airport, try to film it. It's going to look like garbage. It's going to be underexposed. You're going to barely catch anything. It's going to look further away than it does to the naked eye. And as somebody who has now had the experience a year ago or so of having filmed UFOs or whatever, I mean, UAPs that my wife and I saw in the car when we were driving home from the airport one night, it's not easy to do. Like, and it's funny because I've been thinking about this for years. I'm like, I'm going to be ready, you know, and then you're not ready because you're just having a conversation, and you look up and there's these 5 glowing orange lights in the sky that are in a weird configuration, and they start disappearing one by one. And then there's a triangle formation. You're like, what am I actually looking at? Like, at first you're like, oh, it's probably helicopters, or, oh, it's military flares or whatever. And then you're looking at it and you're like, no, they're moving. Like, what is that? And by the time your brain has processed, this is something that's really out of the ordinary, you've missed half of it. You're driving, you know, you can't pull out your phone. So it's really hard for people to get these videos. They tend to be very surprised by these things when they happen, and then they're gone quickly. So but that also makes it easier to make fakes, right? Because you can make it shaky, you can make it blurry, you can make it grainy, and then it's like you hide the CGI behind that.
Yeah, I mean, I think part of the reason why, another reason why people are sort of are able to immediately dismiss it as not real, is, remember that movie back, God, it was years ago, it was the Blair Witch Project. That the whole shtick, right? The whole thing was that they were faking this paranormal stuff with shaky video cameras and weird lit selfies and the whole thing. And of course the point of it is this whole thing was fabricated, right?
Right.
And so I do think that this is part of what's going on. And then I would just add this before, I don't want to go too far into the sort of the video stuff, but we are so conditioned by the movies and television that we watch to, like, we're cued by the music and we're cued by the framing and the lighting is such and such a way that when a real thing shows up, it actually looks anything but real. So at any rate, it's good. Okay, so this pierces through your noise, through your various filters in 2017.
It's empirical data. That's the way I look at it. And I began looking at it as, hey, this is science, right? This is like, we have these recordings, there's measurable instruments on these things. These are highly trained pilots whose job it is to be able to assess from 20 miles away, is that an enemy plane? Is it not? Like, how fast is it going? What size is it? Their whole job is to be able to make these assessments, And like, for example, to give, the Nimitz encounter in 2004, which is really the big groundbreaking one. The lead guy on that, Commander David Fravor, Top Gun trained pilot, over 4,000 hours, in the cockpit, combat missions, was the commander of the Black Aces squadron, was like the third ranking guy in the Pacific, in his battle group. I mean, he was a major guy, and he's the point man who they basically, he was on his way to go investigate, to do military exercises because they were about to be deployed over to the Persian Gulf, I think. And they redirect him. There's two ships. There's the Nimitz and the Princeton. The Princeton is the radar operator. And they're like, hey, we've been seeing these things coming down from 80,000 feet, which is higher than normal flight level. They're dropping down to ocean level in a matter of a second or two. We don't know what they are. We don't know
which makes no sense. Right, which makes no physical sense. Yeah.
And so they're like, can you go take a look at this? Because we've been getting radar pickups on these for a couple of days now, and we don't know what's happening. So he goes out and he engages with the thing, and he's checking out. The first thing that he sees is there's a disturbance in the water, and there's something flying, but the water's foaming and it's frothing. And he's like, I don't know what's going on. He said it looks like, water hitting breakers or something like that. But he's like, we were far enough out. There was nothing under the water that it could have been.
Right.
And there was an object moving around, and he described it as like being like a ping pong ball. It was just bouncing back and forth. It didn't make any sense. And then it caught sight of him, and it stopped. It matched his velocity, and it matched his rotation. And so he's trying to get closer to it, and it's moving around the other side. And he was able to assess that it was about the same size as his plane. He said it looked like a Tic Tac. It was just a white cylindrical lozenge that had little feet at the bottom, but it had no control surfaces, no rudder, no wings, no visible means of propulsion, nothing. And after he tries to get a little bit closer to it, the thing just disappears, right? And he says, the SR-71 at the time was the fastest declassified plane that we knew of. It could make it coast to coast in about an hour and a half. He said, but even at full speed, which it takes a while to get that thing to like Mach 5 or whatever it is that it goes, he said you would watch it recede into the distance for probably 20 or 30 seconds before it disappeared. He's like, this thing was just gone. It was just gone. And he's like, and then I get a call from the radar operator on the Princeton. He's like, Commander, you're never going to believe this. He's like, that thing just popped back up on the radar at your cap point 60 miles away 2 seconds later.
60 miles away.
And the cap point, by the way, was classified. Like, it was their waypoints for their exercise. And so nobody knew except for the pilots and whoever was on the command and control on the ship where they were supposed to be going. So somehow this thing knew where he was going to be and arrived there seconds later, 60 miles away. Like,
so
impossible.
Yeah. So what strikes me, with this, you and I talk a lot about this stuff offline, and, we talk about the various buckets that you can sort of put these phenomena in, right? And what we're talking about right now is really kind of like the military techie portion of this story, right? Yes. It's out in the field. These are trained pilots. These are sort of the best of the best. If you know anything about how anybody becomes a pilot, it is the most rigorous training physically and mentally and emotionally and psychologically. Like, it's the real deal, right?
And if you've seen Top Gun, I mean, David Fravor went through the Top Gun program. He is the real life equivalent of Tom Cruise in Top Gun. That is what his job was.
Right. You know, so these are not woo-woo guys. These are not dreamers. You know, these are,
they can't afford to have that.
These
guys have rigorous psychological evaluations to make sure that they're combat ready and that they can be in the cockpit of a plane that's $20 million and can, you know, take out, like, do some serious damage, you know?
Yeah. So look at this comment from Stephanie. She says, my friend's son is a pilot and he showed me a video he took of crazy moving light formations over the ocean at night. Totally credible. He did not report, but maybe someday he will.
So that's a good point.
Yeah, right. Because, you know, Pasulka talks a lot of, well, not a lot. In one section, I think it's of her first book. Maybe it's her second book. I blend them together. But she talks about the kind of the stigma. You know, there's a weird kind of stigma for hardened pilot types to come forward to talk about this kind of phenomena because it's basically considered low res. What's your sense of that?
I mean, the feeling that I get from everything that I've seen is, first of all, they just get picked on mercilessly.
Yeah,
like the guys harass them. Oh, you're the one who saw the UFO or whatever. But it also calls into question their psychological fitness, their combat readiness. And so they have this reticence of going back and saying, this is what I saw, because they could get pulled off of flight duty. They could, you know, whatever. And so they're like, we're just not going to risk it. We're just not going to talk about it.
Yeah. What's the upside, right? I mean, what's the incentive to say anything? All the incentive is in the other way. All the incentive is just to pretend like you've seen nothing.
You know, and to return for a second to the hearing, which I mean, we're really setting up why the hearing is happening. But Tim Gallaudet, who is Rear Admiral of the Navy, he used to run the National Oceanography Association or whatever that NOAA. They do all the weather for the Navy. He was like the chief meteorologist for the Navy. He did all this stuff, but he was an admiral. He was an actual admiral in the Navy. And he said that one of his earliest experiences with this was, I think it was actually the one that's now called the Go Fast video. I think he was actually in that battle group. And he said there was an email that went out from the main admiral after this had happened, and he was like, what is up there? What's going on? This is a risk to our pilots. Like, what are we seeing? And he's like, within a day or two, that email had disappeared completely from everybody's inbox. It had disappeared from the server. Like, the email was gone. There was never another briefing about it. There was never another conversation about it. The stuff just disappears. And so this is something that these guys had experienced for so long. Now, remember, if you go back, there was not just stigma, there were threats. There were testimonies given by a number of military officers from the Minuteman nuclear bases in the 1960s. Robert Salas is the main one. He's written a book about it. David Schindel was another one. These guys were stationed at Malmstrom Air Force Base, Montana or Wyoming. I don't remember. It's somewhere up in the Northwest. And they were at a Minuteman missile base. They had, I believe, a dozen missiles that were online. So they're down in this hardened bunker, right? And this is happening in the 60s. Okay. And so this is before we have advanced wireless technology or anything like that. Nobody's got Bluetooth. Nobody's got Wi-Fi. They're in a hardened bunker. They get a call from the MPs who patrol around the base, and they're like, you're not going to believe this, but there's like this orange disc floating over the base. We don't know what it is. Do we engage with it? Like, what do we do? We don't have protocol for this. And he's like, as the call's coming in, I'm watching the dashboard and the lights on the missiles are shutting off one by one. They're going from ready state to like fail state.
So no, there's something is pulling a different switch. Somebody's flipping them off from a different mechanism.
That phone line was a landline. It was the only connection to the top side because the base is hardened against electronic interference. So there's no way any signals getting in. And then they do an investigation, and he said that the guidance chip on every single one of those ICBMs had failed. And they have multiple redundancies and all this. He said it just didn't make any sense. And then the thing left, and they all came back online. And so they've publicly testified about this. But Schindel in particular really struck me when he gave his testimony, because he almost broke down and started crying. And he said, I was told that I never saw this, and if I ever spoke about this, that bad things would happen to my family and everything else. And he said, I didn't tell my wife about this for 40 years because I was so afraid of the retribution that might come because I did this. And David Grush, who testified last year in front of Congress, said, People have been killed over this. They've literally been killed to keep this stuff secret. They've been threatened. He's been threatened. Lou Elizondo's been personally threatened. These guys, shadowy forces show up in their lives, and they're being really circumspect about it because there's actually ongoing law enforcement investigations. The Inspector General of the intelligence community is looking into these guys being threatened for being whistleblowers.
Right.
And so it's not just stigma, it's literally fear. These guys are afraid of what will happen if they come forward.
I mean, it's like it's out of a movie, Steve. I mean, it's the kind of stuff that you and I would see in a movie about this.
Yeah.
Like the threats from the weird guys who show up and you didn't see anything, and it would be
the Men in Black. I mean, the Men in Black do, at least in some cases, appear to be real. And there's inconsistencies. I mean, when Fravor saw that thing in 2004, and it wasn't just him.
Right.
I mean, his wingman was a female pilot, Lieutenant Alex Dietrich. And then another group went out and actually filmed the Tic Tac on FLIR, and that was Chad Underwood, and I forget who the other guy was. But like, there were 4 pilots who saw this thing, and one set of pilots that recorded it. But they never got a debrief on it. They never had the Men in Black show up. They were like, we expected somebody to come and say, what did you see? And nobody talked to them. And he's like, so I guess we're allowed to talk about it because nobody ever told me not to. Yeah. So the experience isn't universal, but I think pilots are worried about it. And Ryan Graves, who was another FA-18 pilot who just recently retired, and he started up a nonprofit for pilots to be able to report these things without stigma.
Interesting. Okay.
Both, I think, commercial and military. But he said that their flight group updated their radar systems, and then they started seeing them all the time. It's like, we didn't always see them with our eyes. Sometimes they just came on sensors. We got these new radar packages, and we had near midair collisions with them a number of times. He tells a story of one time one of the guys in his group comes back in his flight suit, throws his helmet down. He's like, I don't know what the hell that thing was, but it almost hit me. And he's like, he was furious. And so it was becoming a safety issue, but they were having a hard time reporting it because nobody wanted to hear it.
All right. So help me out here.
So this is how we get to the hearings, right?
Yeah, right. But just real quick, I want to talk about the physical phenomena of non-known aircraft in mapped airspace. When I mean mapped airspace, it's like we have pretty sophisticated radar technologies, right? That work a certain way. And it seems to me like testimony after testimony after testimony, we have situations in which pilots and their ground, their ground support have a very highly sophisticated and coordinated, where you're flying and what you're flying into. Like, that is sort of, we know that stuff. And yet we have all of this testimony that says, however well we think we can map airspace at any given time, there seem to be these phenomena that challenge the basic assumptions of how air travel works.
Yeah. Yes. I mean, they have seemingly no limitations on them in terms of momentum or inertia. They have rapid acceleration from 0 to whatever. That was, and I was telling you about the SR-71 earlier. Yeah. I mean, the way that these things speed up, they go from nothing to phenomenal, impossible in atmosphere speeds. I mean, think about the space shuttle, the heat resistance that it hits coming into the atmosphere at 18,000 miles an hour or whatever. Yeah. These things are going faster than that in our atmosphere, and they don't seem to be affected by it. Right. Or they'll do a 90-degree turn at speed, which would destroy anything inside of it if it was affected by the laws of gravity and inertia, and it doesn't make any sense. The physics of these things don't make sense.
Right. And I just want to, I'm glad you said it. I just want the physics doesn't make sense. And we're not talking about high level physics here. We're talking about just physical, good old fashioned classic physics.
I mean, Lou Elizondo actually said in the hearing yesterday, one of the most significant statements, and I had never heard this number before. Yeah. He said that the most advanced aircraft we have in our arsenal that anybody knows about, at least, at about 17 G forces, the airframe begins to disintegrate. Right. So he's like, human pilots can take about 9 Gs before they black out.
Right.
And that's with flight suits that keep the blood in their head and all this kind of stuff. At 17 Gs, the physical architecture of the aircraft that we have begins to break down. It begins to just dissolve because of the force of resistance of the atmosphere. He says we have clocked UAPs going at 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 Gs of acceleration. It's impossible.
That's. I mean, God, that alone,
Yeah.
You could spend, okay. So to put a little tag on this part of the conversation, because I do want to go back to Mace's hearings, is it, that's just weird. That's more weird than the frame by which everybody else you and I, everybody in our audience who can kind of think and walk through life, that destroys that frame. It's like the frame of like when I miss a step coming down from the upstairs and I fall down. Like, we understand how all that sort of stuff works, when I put my hand on the table, when I try to jump up and down, like all those sort of normal rules, like that is not sufficient to explain what the phenomena is and the reports are.
So there are 5 observables that they are using to help to classify whether something's a UAP or it isn't, right? And just really quickly on the nomenclature. We used to all call them UFOs, unidentified flying objects, right? And there was a lot of stigma around that, partially because of things like Project Blue Book, which was a big psyop that was meant to debunk things. The government has worked with media and entertainment to do it. The Navy just recently had a Freedom of Information Act request that declassified something that showed that they were intentionally stigmatizing UFO reports. So there's all this negative baggage that's associated with the word UFO. So Jay Stratton, who headed up the UAP task force for the Pentagon for a couple of years, said, we need a new term for this. And not just because of the stigma, but because of the fact that they're not all flying objects. We have other phenomena that are going on. We have submersible objects, things that are moving. Tim Gallaudet in the hearing yesterday said that he was on a nuclear submarine and there was something moving at the speed of a torpedo that began to slow down. It followed them, it altered course, and it took off again. He's like, nothing can do that. Like a torpedo, once it's going, it's going. Like you can't stop it.
Right.
You're not. It's not going to alter course. It's not going to change direction. It's not going to change velocity. And so these things are moving underwater at hundreds of miles an hour forget air resistance. Water resistance is crazy, right? And so they have USOs, underwater submersible objects. They have transmedium vehicles. There's actually a video off the deck of the USS Omaha.
Did you say transmedium?
Transmedium. So what that means is something will be flying and then it drops into the ocean.
Okay.
And there's actual declassified video from the USS Omaha of that happening and of inside the radar room, and they're like, it just splashed down. It went under the water. Like mark bearing, because they're trying to figure out what this thing is and where it's going. Right. This just happened a year or two ago. And so there's all these different variations of these things, whatever it is that they are. And then you have like the weird crap that goes on at Skinwalker Ranch and other places, which also seems to fall under this umbrella of the phenomenon, but it's almost more paranormal. So they came up with this term, unidentified anomalous phenomena.
Right.
And so that's where we get the word UAP from, because it's supposed to be an umbrella that covers all of that. Right. Right. So why did I mention that? I don't know.
Well, you were saying, I was saying that, the frame in which most of us go about our business on a day-to-day
that's what
basis.
it is. The 5 observables of UAP. Yeah. So I wanted to tell you, because these are the characteristics they look for: sudden and instantaneous acceleration, hypersonic velocities without signatures. So signatures would include acoustics, heat, electromagnetic.
Yeah.
Like there's no sonic boom, there's no vapor trail, there's no visible propulsion, there's no signature that tells you like this is an aircraft.
So when Chuck Yeager breaks the sound barrier for the first time, literally a big boom.
Yeah, it's huge.
He goes right. So
and in fact, it's one of the reasons why I was just at the Air and Space Museum, the Dulles Air and Space Museum a few months ago.
Yep.
And I was looking at the thing for the Concorde, and I was like, why don't we have supersonic passenger flight anymore? And they said one of the biggest reasons was the sonic booms. They couldn't find flight paths where that wasn't disruptive to the communities beneath the flight path.
That's funny.
And everybody was complaining about the sonic booms. So it's something we don't know how to overcome. So, and then the last 3 of the 5 observables are low observability. So whether the things are cloaked, whether they're partially visible, whatever it is, whether they're only visible in the infrared spectrum, which we're finding happens a lot. Like people put on night vision goggles, or they'll get a thermal camera, and then suddenly they see these UAPs in the sky, and they put them down, and like there's nothing there.
Right.
Transmedium travel, we've already talked about that, and positive lift, which is objects that are apparently resisting the natural effects of Earth's gravity, but without the normally associated aerodynamic means, wings, rudders, anything, helicopter blades, whatever it is that can actually lift it. These are objects that are shaped like a tic tac or like a disc or like whatever, and there's no control surfaces. There's no obvious way for them to be aerodynamic.
And again, I think maybe a helpful mental illustration of this is we just saw what Elon Musk and his crew achieved a couple of weeks ago of this massive multi-story rocket shooting down from space and being caught by the sort of the metal arms, right? All of the stuff that's going on there, as impressive as it is, you can actually kind of see what is happening, right? You can see that the counter rockets firing and the discharge, and you could sort of see all this, what you might call the signatures or what have you. Like it makes, in other words, it passes the test of the normal frame.
Yeah, you can track it. You have an idea. I mean, even a Black Ops helicopter or whatever that's flying, without a transponder signal, it's going to have characteristics. It's going to have noise. It's going to have heat. It's going to have, whatever. And it can be picked up in a way that's, at least it's identifiable, even if you don't know why it's there or where it came from. Right. So those are the 5 observables that they look for to try to identify how to distinguish these from regular aircraft, from balloons, from whatever. Now, we do have some interesting things. I mean, do you remember it was a year or so ago where there was the Chinese balloon, the spy balloon that flew over the U.S.? Do you remember that?
Oh, I remember. About a year and a half ago, maybe.
But then there were 3 additional things that happened several weeks later where we actually scrambled fighter jets and shot down things that the government refused to say what they were. The pilots in Alaska, one of them was in Alaska, and they claimed that it jammed their sensors, that they couldn't get a good look at it. It was very strange. And so supposedly they shot down these 3 different things with no recovery of the debris, which is very strange because they know where they shot it down.
Right.
But what came out of that was that we have these radar systems all over the country, right? And we're scanning the skies. We're constantly looking for threats, but there are filters on them. So, I mean, imagine that you're working with a spreadsheet, in Excel, right? And you're trying to look at a bunch of data, and you're like, I don't want to see anything below this threshold. Nothing below $100 is worth looking at. We're only going to look at, big ticket items or whatever. However you want to look at the data. So you put a filter on, and it takes that data out of the data set. Well, we had filters on our radar so that we weren't picking up every weather balloon, everything. Part of that was probably what China exploited, because they were like, well, they're looking for aircraft, so we're going to send balloons.
Okay, got it. Yeah.
They realized that there was a gap in our sensor visibility because we had created the gap in order to have better concentrated information on what we perceived as threats.
We forsook a certain level of relevance so that we could see other bigger, different things.
Yeah. So my understanding is the China balloon flies over the US. We didn't detect it at first. We're like, what the heck? So we turned down the filter and we're like, let's look at everything. And then we find these other 3 things that we don't know what they are because they're in that low range, but beneath where the filter was set in terms of what they were looking for. And so there's a lot of that kind of stuff that goes on. So to come back to the hearings, the reason why these hearings are happening is, number one, the military and intelligence people who know what's going on say that these programs that we have that are studying these things, tracking them, reverse engineering programs, there are programs out there to recover crashed craft and then to try to reverse engineer them. Those programs are all unacknowledged special access programs. They're black programs that don't show up. They don't have congressional oversight. If they're going through any branch of the government, they're going purely through the executive, but the Congress has the power of the purse, and they're funding these programs under false auspices, which is illegal. They're keeping the information from Congress, from the intelligence committees, from the armed services committees, all this stuff that they should be knowing what's going on with these threats for reasons that are unspecified, because the guys who have the information have been locked down with NDAs that they, ironclad, you can't talk about this. They've been threatened 2 ways from Sunday. Like, it's not just their careers, it's their families, Like David Grush never said what happened, but he said he came home one night and it was very clear to him and his wife that they could get to him at any time.
So,
and he felt physically threatened, like that they were going to do something to him.
So like that's disgusting. I want to make sure that people understand what Steve just said, that there are these forces funded unknowingly or unattributedly. The funding sources are not attributed. Let me be clear. Sorry. And these people, if you go run counter to them, they threaten you the way that the mob threatens informants in a movie, say like The Godfather. I mean, that's what we're talking about here, Steve. Like, that's weird.
They're pushing for transparency. They're pushing for whistleblower protection because these guys are working inside the Department of Defense. They're finding out that these programs exist. They're finding out that not only does the American people not know about it, the president doesn't necessarily know about it. The thing that has come up over and over for me in my last few years of research is the president is considered by these deep state actors, because that's basically what they are. I mean, I know it's kind of a broad category, but the president is considered a temporary employee who does not have a need to know about this stuff.
Right. So, man, we could sit on that one for a long time here. And you were telling earlier, you were referencing the story of 2017, where some, the story kind of finally got through your filters. And I just wonder, how would I have heard this in, let's say, 2010?
That's a good question.
You know what I mean? Like, I think of the ways in which so much of this stuff is swirling around at a time in which many of my blocking mechanisms have been wilted, have been, the walls that I had sort of constructed and been given are not the same as they were in 2010. I'm just using 2010 as a, and what we have lived through in the last 7, 8, 9, 10 years, let's just call it a decade. It has really altered the way that I even listen to what you're talking about right now.
Well, if you think about it, social media is a lot more new and recent than it feels like it.
Yeah. That's right.
I've been on Twitter since 2008.
Right.
So just before your sort of arbitrary 2010 marker.
Yeah.
2008 is like basically when Twitter came online. It was 2007, 2008. Facebook, same thing. Like, they didn't exist. They weren't there. Right. Social media has become the way that we share all this information, but it's also the way that we've become completely overwhelmed by the amount of information that comes in.
Right. There's a fire hose.
So in 2008, if this story had happened, if these congressional hearings had happened, it would be the biggest news in the world.
Right.
Now it's like people don't even know what's going on.
Right. But this is what I want to talk about, right? If it would have been the biggest story in the world in 2008, I still think I would have been sufficiently guarded to hear it properly. Whereas in part, so many of those defense mechanisms have been filed down to insignificance that now when I hear these stories, I'm actually kind of like listening.
Oh, that might as well happen.
well, that's what I mean, Steve, right? I mean, think of the wildness of everything that has happened, from the past 3 elections, COVID, the revelation, for me and you, this is one of the things that hits home.
Everything you've been reading about the CIA and the stuff that they were doing through the 60s and 70s.
The chaos, the chaos book and all this sort of stuff, but also the stuff that we've lived through with the church abuse crisis, so much of these frames that were really quite robust, say in 2010 are just gone now.
Yeah.
Like, all of those very comfortable, this is terra firma and this is terra firma, those are just gone now.
And we're much more inclined to believe the testimony of a whistleblower over the testimony of an institution or an official spokesperson, because we're like, well, yeah, of course they're going to deny it. All they do is lie.
Right. So Twitter files, again, I still can't believe people don't talk about that every day, like Twitter files and Facebook and all that sort of stuff, but also, the Snowden stuff and the Assange stuff. I mean, so much of this stuff has come out that it is impossible merely to just say, oh, that's nuts.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
But I mean, let's contextualize this.
Yeah,
yesterday, we had a retired admiral of the U.S. Navy, a retired counterintelligence, counterterrorism Pentagon official,
yeah,
an investigative journalist who has broken some of the biggest stories of the last 2 years, and a guy, I believe, who works at a defense contractor who's involved with all this stuff, sitting there in front of Congress telling them under oath, we have alien technology, or we have non-human technology, non-human bodies. We are involved in recovering and trying to reverse engineer these craft. They are all confirming with yes or no questions. Yes, we have it. Yes, we have bodies. Yes, this is real. What the heck?
Right.
You know,
right.
I mean, the level of suspension of disbelief that you have to say, like, these guys aren't all just lying to us. Because, I mean, the way I look at it is, what does it benefit them to do this? Like, nobody's paying attention to this. I mean, this is one of the problems. The public at large are yawning at this. They don't care. They care about how much gas costs and how much eggs cost and can they make their next mortgage payment, right? That's what this election was about. That's what they were worried about. But we've got this thing going on, and we've got military intel guys going, this could be initial preparation of the battlefield that we're looking at. We could be facing an invasion of a superior technology that we have no answer for, because we don't have the ability to touch these things if they don't want us to. Like, they can just take off and they're gone. They can phase in and out of reality. Like, we don't know what they are.
Right. Okay. So, sorry, I'm not laughing at you. I'm just like, this is wild.
At the absurdity of it.
Yeah, right.
Pretty crazy.
Yeah. So, yesterday, you were tweeting yesterday about some of this stuff. I was tweeting about some of the stuff. I asked you a question. You tweeted it. It was great, you know. And I cannot tell you, Steve, like, so much of the feedback that I get. Now, I have, you know, whatever. My Twitter feed is my Twitter feed, right? And I cannot tell you how many times people simply default to it's all just a psyop, right? And one of the reasons why I wanted to have you on, and I wanted, you know, have this conversation publicly, and hopefully we'll have more conversations about this stuff publicly, is that I could imagine a former version of me saying exactly that, right? Just a psyop, like, you know, they're, you know, and part of what I have learned from you, and then the various rabbit holes that I've gone down because of our conversations, and the books that I've read because of our conversations, and then the other books that I've just read, and, you know, is that it would be really nice if this were just a psyop.
Yeah.
I mean, it would be great. I mean, it would be great. But
I mean, Lou Elizondo, again, I mean, the guy just wrote the book, Imminent, the Pentagon Hunter's Search for UFOs, or whatever the subtitle of it is. I mean, he says in the book flat out that he sees no reason to assume that these things are benevolent.
Right.
You know,
Gosh,
he's like,
as
a military intel guy, he's like, what it looks like to me is that they're potentially trying to do reconnaissance and preparation of a battlefield, because that's what we do.
Yeah.
He's like, they're not interacting with us in a way that is helpful. They're not intervening. They're not stopping us from nuking each other. They're not stopping us from starting wars. They're super interested in our nuclear equities, but they didn't stop the bombings in Japan.
Right.
They didn't stop us from, you know, doing all the nuclear tests that we've done around the world. They're not keeping us from killing ourselves or each other. So he's like, at best, they're neutral. Because a benevolent race, you would assume they would intervene and be like, hey guys, you're going to kill yourselves.
Maybe we should call a timeout and stop a few of these things. I
mean, we have to remember, this is why Elon Musk and Eric Weinstein want to make humanity multiplanetary. They're worried we're going to kill ourselves. They're like, we've got to create a redundant backup of this species that we're a part of, because if we don't have another planet that we're on, when we all blow ourselves up, there's going to be, that's it. That's the end.
Right. There's no escape valve. There's no escape hatch. There's no, you know, C-3PO being sent off into Tatooine with the message. There's nowhere else to go.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
You know, I do marvel at that people, I have never been one of those people who think that sort of have a pre-belief that this stuff could be benevolent. Like, I've just always thought of it as like, yeah, they're coming to eat. Like, I just have, I don't know. Whereas a lot of people are like, oh, like, I'd love to talk to an alien. Like, I don't really know if I want to, you know, I'm not so sure.
I mean, you know, I think those of us who have a high trait openness, you know, like, we like going to other countries and trying their food and meeting the people. And it's like, yeah, but you go to Papua New Guinea and they're cannibals. So you got to watch out for that. Like, don't be too open.
It's a potential hazard. That's all I'm saying. It's a potential hazard. All right. So one of the things that I noticed about the hearing yesterday was, again, and you are deeper into this than I am, although
You're getting pretty
keep
deep.
up with it. I keep up with it. But one of the things that struck me as an observer yesterday is that there's this weird game that's being played between the members of Congress who are sitting at the sort of the big tables, right? And then the smaller tables are the people being interviewed. And they'll do this thing where they'll be asked a question and then it's like, I can't talk about that, or I can't do this I can do that when in private. There's this weird kind of game going on.
Yeah.
And what do you make of that? Again, as for people who don't follow this as closely as either of us.
Well, I mean, I think some of it is performative.
Right.
During the hearing, Nancy Mace, who's running the hearing, is tweeting out things like this. Next person to say closed session conversation is getting launched in one of the Project Mogul weather balloons. She's just fed up with hearing it. She also tweeted out, if I hear closed session conversation one more time, I'm going to lose it, right?
Yeah.
But on the other hand, she knows, because she's been in these hearings before, that these guys are trapped between a rock and a hard place. They want to disclose what they know, but they are impeded. As Lou Elizondo said several times during the hearing yesterday, he said, I have signed documentation that prohibits me from discussing that.
Right.
And so, I replied to her, and who knows if she saw it, but I was like, if you really want them to stop saying it, you've got to find a way to liberate these guys from the restrictions that they're under. Yeah. They want to tell you, they're not allowed to tell you, and the repercussions for them will be devastating if they do. So they have to be free. So what happens is they do this game, this dance in public, and it's like they're trying to actually generate curiosity and frustration. They're like, this is what's going on. This is what I'm allowed to tell. Now, they are allowed to tell some things, and this is in itself a very interesting little game. Okay. So DOPSR, the Defense Office Publication Review, I can never remember what the acronym is.
Those acronyms. Yeah.
But they have to go through DOPSR in order to come forward. David Grush had to do it when he did his thing last year. Right. Elizondo said it took him a year to get approval for his book. But there's a kind of cat and mouse game that they play. If he writes a book and he says, all right, let me know if I'm allowed to publish this without getting in trouble, and they come back and they redact everything. Well, now they've just admitted, as Congressman Moskowitz said yesterday, he's like, the thing about not talking about Fight Club is you can't talk about Fight Club if there's no Fight Club. Right. He's like, nobody's allowed to talk about it because there's a Fight Club. Right. So the Defense Department has to be careful, because if they try to redact everything, they actually accentuate believability, because that means you're hiding something. And so they let a certain amount of information out that they feel is benign enough or non-specific enough that it won't be incriminating. And this is the downstream effect of that, is everybody that you see responding to these things saying, this is bull crap, I don't believe it until I see photos and videos and alien bodies. And it's like, well, the only way you're going to get to that is if you can break down this wall of secrecy that these people are hidden behind. And one of the ways that they do this within the Defense Department and other areas of the government is they'll grab somebody right out of graduate school or whatever, and they'll be like, hey, you just got your PhD in physics. Do you want to work on some of the most exciting stuff that you've ever seen? Oh yeah, I'd love to. So well, here's the catch. Yes. Yeah. Here's the catch. We can't tell you what it is until you sign a non-disclosure agreement, but it's amazing. You're not going to be able to talk about it, but you're going to be at the cutting edge of physics. Right. And you're going to leave an impact and blah, blah, blah. And they butter them up. Right. Yeah. So then they sign the non-disclosure agreement, and then they take them to the lab, and they're like, here's a spacecraft that we recovered. Do you think it's extraterrestrial? What can you tell us about its propulsion system? Whatever it is. Although it's very compartmentalized from what we've heard. So they don't let everybody know what everybody else is doing.
The whole, right. Yeah. Right.
Because they don't want anybody to have the whole picture, because then they risk catastrophic disclosure.
But again,
but that's how they hook people in, and then they get stuck. And then they can't talk about it, because in order for them to know, they had to sign these things. And now that they've signed these things, they're stuck.
Okay, so then if there is some sort of process or whatever scheme, you keep one part over here and another part over here and one part over here, and you sort of have all these parts sort of scattered all over the place. That's impossible without some sort of coordinating genius.
There has to be a cigarette smoking man.
Right.
And for those of you who are familiar with the X-Files.
Well, look, and I think people in the audience just have to get over the fact that all of our comps are movies and television programs.
And by the way, there's some really interesting tangential stuff there where, Bryce Zabel and Ross Coulthart. Ross Coulthart is an award-winning investigative journalist from Australia. He's been on Australia 60 Minutes. He's on their Channel 7. He's one of their biggest and most famous news guys over there. He has gotten involved in this, sort of stumbled his way into it unintentionally. Bryce Zabel was a screenwriter for Hollywood who's been interested in this topic for a long time.
Right.
He was one of the co-writers of the show Dark Skies, which I never saw, but it came out and kind of rode the coattails of X-Files and had several seasons. But he tells this story about how when they had the launch party for Dark Skies, this guy shows up at his house. It was a private party where they were watching the pilot episode.
Yeah, I read this story. This is amazing.
And this guy shows up at his house and he's like, hey, I'm from the government. And I got to say, the stuff that you have in the show is actually really close to the real stuff that we really know. And we'd like to work with you on developing the plot lines to make sure that you accentuate certain things and don't. And he knew everything about the show, but nobody knew about the show. This is the first time that anybody other than the directors, editors, and writers had seen it.
Yeah.
And so he gives them, this information. He leaves them some weird thing on a napkin. I can't even remember what it was. It was a formula, I think.
Yeah.
And he was like, in 20 years, this is going to make sense to you. And of course, they all thought he was crazy. They threw the napkin away. They didn't keep it, whatever. But they were unnerved by the fact that he wasn't invited. He shows up. He knows everything about the show. And he's basically telling them, we want to sort of do soft disclosure to the public through entertainment. Because if we familiarize people with these concepts, then when the truth comes out, they'll be more ready for it than they would have been otherwise. Yeah. And I don't know how much of that informs how close the movies are to what's really happening. I don't know. I have no way of knowing.
Right. No, that's fair. But I just think that people should understand that the way the mind works is that, you process new information through the images and stories that you store in your long-term memory.
Yes.
And so what's striking to me throughout this whole endeavor, this whole, sort of discovery, is how often they resonate with different images. So for instance, you were talking about crash retrieval stuff where they take things and they will tear it apart and try to do some sort of reverse engineering, right? So the image that popped up in my head was Terminator 2, right? In which the guy takes them, they go to kill the doctor, but the doctor takes them to headquarters, and they're in that back section. You see images of the original. They have the physical remnants of the original Terminator. Oh yeah. And the sort of these preserved wreckage that they have used to drive forward the technologies. And so you have these weird leaps in technology. And so now I can hear people right now saying, well, Cale, that's why it's a stupid Hollywood movie, right? I think that's part of that's part of the way that this works, is but there's something underneath all of that, right? That there's this whole notion of reverse engineering, of course, is that that has happened since the first Sword, right? I mean, this is the whole idea.
I mean,
right?
This is why we don't let our military technology fall into enemy hands. If a plane goes down, that somebody has to go destroy it. Right. Or it has to have a self-destruct function, or it has to be something, because we don't want the enemy to know how to do what we do.
Right.
If we have a technological edge, we just don't let it happen.
That's right.
And so, to come back to the hearings, they're happening so that the stigma can be broken down. They want the public to know, and they want the public to be frustrated. The Congress people are frustrated, right? They're frustrated because they can't get these answers outside of a closed session. In previous hearings, when David Grush was telling them, I can't have this conversation in an open session. If you have the classification, if you have the clearance, we can go into a SCIF, a secure briefing room, and I can give you that information. He's like, but I can't do it in open session. And then they tried to get a SCIF, and nobody would approve them to get a SCIF. Some order had come down where you don't get to have the SCIF. Right. And Congressman Tim Burchett came out and talked about that. Right. So one of the things they're trying to do at the hearings is let's break the stigma down. Another thing they're trying to do is let's get interest up and get the will of the people to be like, what are they hiding from us? so that they start pushing. Because if they don't start pushing their representatives, if they don't start pushing their senators, this stuff's never going to break through. And so it's been this campaign of kind of chipping away at the walls of secrecy, you know, the weight of stigma, all this stuff, so that we can have an honest conversation about this, and we can get to the point where the people are like, you know what, find a way to protect these guys so we can know what they know. And I think that's why they're doing the game that you discuss, where they ask questions in public that they know these guys can't answer.
Yeah, right.
Because they want them to say, I can't answer that because I am restricted from doing so.
Right.
So there will be pushback on that.
Right. So you're talking about the sort of the theater aspect of this, right? That there's intentional theater going on in such a way to sort of create tensions and create pressures, it seems to me, so as to, you know, move this thing
and they
forward.
Find interesting ways to get at this. I mean, one of the questions that Elizondo was asked yesterday that I thought was really good, that Nancy Mace asked him, was, you know, you said in your book that we have service members who are on paid disability from injuries that they received by being in proximity to UAPs. And he said, yes, that's correct. I was cleared to say that. So yes, that's correct.
I can say that. Yes. Yeah.
And so she says, well, why are we paying people for injuries from UAPs if UAPs don't exist? And he's like, ma'am, that's a very good question. And I think more questions like that should be asked. You know, it's like,
okay, so that's a perfect example. So that's a perfect example, right? That alone should be enough for people to stop. Now, again, so what has dominated this conversation today, Steve, is we are talking about sort of military industrial complex sphere problems, right? That touch on questions of governance and, of the people, by the people, and for the people, right? I mean, that's really what
right do they have to keep this from us?
Right.
You know, like Mark Andreessen, for example, had said in a recent interview that he found out in a meeting at the White House that they have classified entire areas of physics that they don't want the public to know about because they consider it a threat. And people will make the distinction of, like, you can understand nuclear physics, but you can't understand how we make nuclear weapons.
Right.
Like,
So
we're going to stop you
from the
engineering that we've done. Yeah. But there's nobody is allowed to classify an entire area of physics.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Like, everybody has access to that. Everybody should.
You can't have. There's no such proprietary. Like, what standing do you have to classify? 2 + 2 = 4.
Right.
Like, that's the absurdity of that. Right. Okay. So and look, in another day, I really would like to have I'm not shutting this down. We have plenty of time to go here.
Yeah, that's fine.
But there are just so many different buckets of this conversation, and so I'm perfectly fine with this portion of the conversation being about the sort of the tech, military, governmental side of things. But there's also the paranormal side.
With this.
Wait, what?
I said I don't like where you're going with this, because you're going to get to the weird stuff.
No, you know me, like, that's probably my favorite part of this whole thing, is the weird stuff.
No, it's interesting.
Yeah, but I'm fine. I think we can keep this within the frame of technology for this conversation. But the reason why I care, like, so I posted that what I did yesterday on Twitter, and gosh, like, nobody seems to care about it. And all of the answers that I got back, and most of the people that interact with me on Twitter are really of good faith, and so this is in no way a slam on them, but I can see the kind of responses like, why should I care? Or this is just a psyop, or like, when I can see, a little green man walking out of a shiny spaceship, then come talk to me. And okay. But every one of us, especially if you're an American in this context, every American should care that there are whole swaths of activity. So there are whole realms of activity, expensive activity, that are going on in which the people who are ostensibly in charge are not in charge of. And so then the question that I have is that, well, then who the heck is in charge of that? like if how is there a layer above the president of the United States?
Yeah.
How is there a layer above the any of the three branches of government? Like that.
But all you have to do, I mean, just think about it. Like, David Grush, one of his characteristics that made him more credible was that he was so highly cleared. It was his job to carry the presidential daily briefing to the White House in the briefcase and give the president his daily briefing in the morning. Like, that's one of the highest levels of clearance you can have.
Right.
But somebody chooses what goes into that briefing. And it's not the president, right? So somebody's deciding what the president needs to know and what he doesn't need to know.
Right.
So even just on that level, you just get to, a functional reality of, the president doesn't need to know that. He doesn't have to worry about that. But this is important for him to know. This is within his realm of competence and expertise.
Right.
And so people are deciding that. And who are they? I don't know. But one of the reasons that came out in the hearing, speculatively, of why this stuff hasn't been released, I think it was Tim Gallaudet who said, I think that the government doesn't want us to know, or the people within the government who are controlling the secrecy don't want us to know that there are gaps in our ability to control our own airspace and to keep the nation safe, because that's their job. And they don't want people to know that they have no answer to whatever this is. And it could be as simple as embarrassment for some people of like, we need to be on top of this and we're not, and it will undermine the public's confidence in our ability to do our job.
Right.
And as of right now, nothing seems to be threatening anybody. So maybe we can just let it kind of ride as we continue to try to figure out what it is.
Okay. So why is the zit coming to a head now? Like seriously, like what are the pressures that are sort of forcing this to the forefront now? Like, because of the stuff that I've read, I mean, basically we're really talking about a time frame from around the Second World War to now.
Yes.
Right. That's what we're talking about. And there's all kinds of interesting speculation. There's all kinds of fascinating stories about like the Vatican finds out first and like, weird
so
situations.
the story really quickly is in the 1930s, allegedly, according to David Grush, again, the intelligence officer who came out with this stuff last year, he said that in the 1930s, Mussolini and the Italian military retrieved a crashed vehicle of some kind and had it in their possession. And then the Nazis came and took it after the Alliance during World War II. And when Pius XII took office, which was after the end of the war, if I'm not mistaken, right at the end of the war, I think.
Right at the end of the war.
I think it was Pius XI coming into World War II, and then Pius XII took over. Anyway, when he found out that they had it, he allegedly contacted the OSS, the Office of Special Services,
which is the forerunner of the CIA.
To the CIA, and said, "Hey, look, they have this thing, and it's supposedly
by the way,
is this.
We don't really know what to do with it." So
so the Americans came in at the end of the war and under the dark of night took it and brought it back home, and that is the first documented case of military involvement with one of these that anybody is allowed to talk about.
Right.
So we're going back to the 30s and 40s.
Yeah. So that's weird. I mean, let's just be blunt. I mean, that's just freaky. That's just weird. So the Pope is involved. Like, hello, bizarre. Okay. So anyway, we're talking about a period of time. So again, we'll call it not even 100 years in the grand scheme of things. Not even 100 years. So why now? I mean, and I'm asking you to speculate here. I know that there's nothing hard and fast here, but why all of this pressure now?
I mean, it's a great question, and I think it's the question that maybe we need answered more than anything else.
Okay.
I have watched. You know how you can just read some people's character and whether they're trustworthy or not.
Yeah.
And you'll see, the public commentary on these people. Oh, he's a grifter, he's whatever. But you're like, no, that guy's telling the truth. And then other people trust, and you'd be like, I don't trust that person.
Yeah.
So Lou Elizondo to me is a guy who just immediately hits the trust button inside of me. And I have friends like this. Like, he reminds me of one of my friends who used to be military, and you just know, like, he's a good guy. You can trust him. He's all about duty and honor and patriotism and all the right things.
Yeah.
And he has been asked this question, and he won't comment, but the way that he avoids commenting indicates that something is coming.
Yeah.
Sooner rather than later, and that he can't talk about what it is, but he's worried that it's coming soon. Simultaneously, if you look at the reporting systems, because now that Congress is mandating update us, the number of incidents being reported is going up and up and up. It's not going down. Like, it's happening more and more frequently. Simultaneously, we have the advent of technology that is allowing, updated radar systems, updated infrared systems that are capturing more of this stuff. Like Ryan Graves said, when we updated our sensor packages on the F-18s, Suddenly we started seeing these things everywhere, and we hadn't seen them before. Watching this show Skinwalker Ranch, people laugh at it, but if you watch all 5 seasons, I mean, there's some crazy stuff that goes on.
I was just going to bring it up because I think if the audience wants a kind of quickie primer, just like mow through Skinwalker Ranch, because
it's edited like a reality show, which throws you off because you feel like, oh, they're just playing this up. But the thing is, the guys who work on this thing have suffered real injuries that are inexplicable. They've had real experiences that are incredibly strange. They have this thing called the hitchhiker effect, where something follows them home. Robert Bigelow, who was the aerospace guy who bought the ranch initially from private owners and worked with the government to study what was going on there, sold the ranch, according to one of the guys who currently works there, because his wife had an orb follow her home, fly through her. She gets cancer and she dies. And he's like,
she's dead.
He's like, F this. I don't want this place. It's too dangerous. And he's like, I'm letting it go. And so there's weird stuff, right, that goes on at these places. And nobody really knows what's happening with it and what's behind it all. But the number of incidents are going up, and the technology that allows them to capture. The reason I brought up Skinwalker Ranch is I'm 4 seasons in, and they're having a hard time proving anything. And then in the 5th season, it's like, hey, we got military night vision goggles. And suddenly the guy who's flying the helicopter is like, there's orbs flying all around me. Like, I can see them and you guys can't see them. They get infrared cameras, and they're showing UFOs like flying all around when they're doing their experiments. Like every time they launch a rocket or they do the things that they do that seems to provoke the phenomenon from happening, they're catching it on infrared, but the regular cameras aren't seeing anything. And so I think technological advances, the ubiquity of cell phones with high quality cameras, you have literal military pilots pulling out their cell phones and filming stuff out of the cockpit window so that they have their own record of things, because they don't know if the cockpit cameras and everything are going to be confiscated or whatever else. So we're just getting to a tipping point in terms of people's ability to capture this stuff where you just can't keep it a secret anymore. And I think there's multiple potential factors, but nobody who knows is able to say why now. But Lou has a huge sense of urgency. David Grush has a huge sense of urgency. And because, so there's a feeling of something.
They're risking.
And his book is called Imminent. Like, what's imminent, dude? Like, what's coming that you can't tell us about?
Well, the word that keeps coming into my head for a variety of different reasons, but this will make sense to you given your background, is Advent, right? Like there's this, you can, again, for what it's worth, like you can kind of feel it. I don't know what to make of that, right? And I know it's not, I don't make a bet on anything like this, right? But it does seem to be this sort of this prevailing mood of anxious anticipation, and for me, I mean, look, I'm a curious guy. You know me. I like to know stuff. I like to look things up. I like, of course, I read the news. So in part, it's playing right into my own priors. But that sense of anxious, it's not quite a foreboding, but it's also not, oh man, I can't wait, this is going to be great. Like it's not that for me at all. I don't know how it is for you. I mean, again, from a strict curiosity standpoint, you damn straight I want to know. But it's not exactly like grab the popcorn, a tall Coca-Cola and sit on the couch, like waiting for the ball to drop on New Year's Eve.
What it reminds me of sometimes is, being in Tradland, like I was.
Catholic, Oh, okay. I know where you're going.
For 17, 18 years.
Yeah.
Like the third secret of Fatima stuff,
that's
right?
That's right.
And there was this thing that is part of the lore around the supposedly unrevealed portion of the third secret of Fatima, which was an interview that Pope John Paul II gave at Fulda, Germany, like in the 80s. And somebody asked him about, why hasn't this come out? And allegedly, because again, it's like one interview that was in a foreign language newspaper, and it's like, is it real? Is it not? But what he said was, maybe for the world to know that some cataclysmic event is going to happen that's going to wipe out a huge amount of the world's population isn't beneficial for everybody to know. Something along those lines. I'm paraphrasing. And so I get that feeling sometimes from Lou Elizondo, where I've heard him say things like, maybe if disclosure comes too soon or is too thorough and the public becomes aware of this, then it accelerates the thing that's going to happen, because now they know we know.
Right.
And he's hinted at that multiple times of like, we have to walk a careful line here, because he's like, if the enemy knows you've figured out his plans, they're going to move up the attack.
Interesting.
And so I don't know if that's what it is, but there is something to that. And so, yes, from a pure curiosity standpoint, I'm like, come on, give me the information. I've been paying attention to this now for like 8 years. I want to know what's going on, right?
Yeah.
But on the other hand, when you stop and think about it, it may be terrifying. Like maybe when we actually find out, it's going to suck. Maybe we don't want to know this, because what's going to happen isn't going to be good. I don't know. I mean, going back to the whole, are they benevolent? Are they neutral? Or are they malevolent? And even, is it a singular phenomenon, or is it a multivalent phenomenon where there's different groups that are here for different reasons and have different kinds of interactions with people? Because you'll have people who are experiencers who will say they have some positive experiences, and then they'll have people who are experiencers say they have horrifying experiences. And it's kind of difficult to sort it all out. And then you get to the whole crossover to the normal paranormal and the spiritual, and it's like the people who are like, hey, maybe these are really angels and demons, or maybe angels and demons are really these things, and we thought that they were angels and demons, but there's something from somewhere else. And there's all this kind of weird crossover that happens in the dirt, that it's very difficult to kind of sort out what to expect from this. But at the same time, you can't unsee what you've seen. You can't turn off the whole, hey, there's like, it's what is from the Hitchhiker's Guide, the famous bug bladder beast of Trawl, or whatever it is, where it's like he's so incredibly stupid that he thinks that if you can't see him, he can't see you.
Yeah, right.
It's like there's this whole, you can't bury your head in the sand once you know.
Yeah.
Just because you don't want to know, like you can't be like, well, now I don't want to look at that because I don't want it to disrupt my life. I would rather know what's coming than not, personally. I don't know if that's crazy, but
yeah. So, I've been teaching Chaucer to my students the last couple of weeks, and having a great time as always. Me and my old books.
Yeah.
And I'm one of the great benefits of teaching the same books in liturgical fashion year after year is that I'm privy to patterns that I would otherwise not be aware of. And so, at any rate, this last go through, I'm really being kind of obsessed with this idea, of what you want and all that. And in the Knight's Tale, it's a kind of parable, or an allegory about free will and fate and fortune and providence and all these kinds of big questions. And of course, as soon as I say those words out loud, everybody immediately goes into a religious register. And I think that you don't have to go there. And in fact, there might even be a kind of interesting disclosure that can happen if you can unhear the words in the frame you're used to hearing them. And so this past go around, it's the story of these two guys. They both see the same girl. They both fall in love with the girl, and one has to leave, and the other one is imprisoned where she is. And so they're both sort of kept from her. And then the question is, well, who has it worse, right? And anyway, the genius, the question around which the entire story circulates is this: we do not know the thing for which we pray. And again, it almost sounds kind of like religious and pat, it almost, but if you really start to think about the implications of this question, and you can use the word prayer there to maybe substitute in desire or beseech, that thing that we want. And so we do not know the thing for which we long for, right? Sort of taking that as the model. And so when I think of what you and I are talking about, and information and knowledge and UAPs and all this sort of stuff, what I find fascinating about this moment that we're living in is that we don't quite know what we want.
Yeah.
And yet all of us are kind of circling around this issue, and we have this sort of these visceral reactions to the thing. And so it's like, I think it's real and it's true, and I can't wait to find out. Or it's all a load of shit, and I can't believe people are buying this psyop, right? And these sort of these like we immediately sort of sink into the mode in which we want to handle this fundamental ambiguity. This is a true confound to life as we know it.
Well, I mean, we have very entrenched epistemological barriers.
That's exactly right.
A phenomenon that we don't really have a framework for, right? So what we do is we map it. And it's interesting, we were talking about earlier about how we contextualize things through movies and things like that we've seen, because like science fiction movies are the things that give us context for like what it might be like if aliens were real, right? And so if you think of a group of aliens that are from all different races, it's hard not to conjure up the Mos Eisley cantina scene from Star Wars or whatever.
That's right.
Because that's the thing that you saw at an early impressionable age. It was like, oh, this is what it looks like when a bunch of aliens from different places are all in one place. But the problem with these things is first of all, they're probably not accurate.
Right.
And secondarily, like, it's not just these cultural tropes that we try to see things through, but it's religious tropes, it's philosophical tropes. Like, we have these ideas of this is how the world works. And so if something doesn't fit into the way that I automatically reference back to the things that I know, then it can't be real, because I don't have a framework for that. It doesn't fit. It doesn't make sense. Okay. And so I deny it outright, or I say it's preposterous, or maybe I'm a guy who's had experiences where I believe that I've been abducted by something, and I've gone through experiments, and I've had all this. And now I'm like, y'all don't understand what's on the other side of the matrix. Like, I woke up from the matrix, and this is this, and that is that. And now you have to deal with people thinking that you're crazy. And now you become more aggressive and more combative, because you're like, disclosure has to happen because this is real and I need people to believe me. And you see a lot of these people out there like, I've been through this. We need to rip the Band-Aid off. People need to know this is real because it's dangerous and I've been through it. So there's all these people coming at it from different perspectives, and they all, have their own frameworks. And the big one that I always got when I was still doing 1 Peter 5 is that anytime I would post, and I tried to stick to the empirical for the reason, it's their demons. I mean, some guy did it today and he was joking with me because he knows I hate it. But I'm like, it's too simplistic an answer. Like, demons don't need technical craft. They don't leave bodies and wreckage behind. They don't do all these things that interact in a corporeal and physical way. Even if demons are real, they're not that, whatever that is. And that's why for years I stuck only to the technical and only to the scientific and only to the empirical, because I didn't want to get into the crossover between the spiritual and whatever this is. And there is a Venn diagram that overlaps there, but I don't know how to process that.
That's where I go. You know me enough to know that I didn't really start taking this stuff too seriously. Like, the tech stuff is interesting to me, but for whatever reason, that doesn't fire up my imagination. What fires up my
to me, that's the thing that disambiguates this from any other known phenomenon. I need to know the thing that sets this apart and puts it in its own category.
And
that's why I zero in on that. But I can't limit myself to that. And I've come to that conclusion.
Let me be clear. I am interested in this stuff, and that's one of the things that you and I like to talk about. But in terms of what really grabs me are the experiencers. That is a layer to this, because it's interesting, because in the whole sort of military tech craft portion of this conversation, it's all about aliens, UFO, whatever, hiding, right, staying away, tracking, and then being detected and bolting off. Like, it's like the predator with his cloaking device, and then the only way you kill the predator is by eliminating his cloaking device so you can see it, and if it bleeds you can kill it, right? That whole thing, right? So there's that aspect of the aliens who love to hide, but then you've got this other part of things. It's like aliens who seem to like to manifest, aliens who seem to like to engage and do weird things.
I don't get the impression, after the amount of time I've spent with this, that they're cagey, but they want us to know that we're here, whatever they are.
That's interesting.
And Lou Elizondo made an interesting point that I hadn't considered. Representative Eric Burleson asked him, you know, are they communicating with us? Do you know whether we have had communication with them as a government or? And he said, well, that's a tricky question, because he said there are different kinds of communication, right? We have the communication that we're having right now, or we're having a verbal interaction, or we have, he's like, but we have a lot of nonverbal forms of communication. He said, when a Russian plane enters American airspace and we scramble F-22s to meet it, we are communicating intent, capability, you know, force options. Like, we're letting them know, we know you're here, we can take you down. And he's like, that's what they're doing to us all the time. They're showing up and saying, Steve, you can't touch us.
Yeah, this is the opening joke of the original Top Gun, right? Is that Maverick and Goose fly upside down on top of the MiG. Right. And like, that's the whole, like, well, I pushed this machine beyond the tolerances which you, Miss Consultant, think is impossible. Right. So but the communication. So I'm seeing what you're saying about communication, right? So that's conveying something very without language.
And I think, you know, going back to the question of epistemological barriers, one of the things that I find really interesting, and luckily raising my own epistemological bastions, to borrow from Hans von Balthasar, has helped me to see things that I wouldn't have otherwise seen, to consider opinions that I wouldn't have otherwise, you know, considered. And there's this evolutionary biologist, cognitive scientist. His name is Donald Hoffman, and he's out of I think he's at Berkeley or one of the Stanford, I don't know, one of the California universities that's known for science and tech. And he says that he and his team have been running all these, you know, because apparently there are mathematical equations for evolution, and I didn't know that there were, but they have models that show probability of one thing evolving into another or whatever. He's like, all the equations that we've run, all the simulations that we've run and everything tells us that there is a 0 probability that human beings have evolved to perceive reality as it actually is, because evolution is essentially lazy. It's like, what do I need to give you in order to survive? And once you're at the point where you're doing okay and you're surviving, I'm not, like, there's no more selective pressure.
It's conservation, right? There's a
and
sort
so
of
we stop.
Conservative.
Entropy, right? Like, you know, and homeostasis. Like we look to reach that balance. But I mean, there's real world examples of this. Mantis shrimp can perceive like 16 million colors. Pit vipers can see the infrared spectrum. You know, other animals can see ultraviolet. There's all these. There's this really interesting phenomenon called infrasound, which I just recently found out about, and its frequencies, I think it's under 20 kilohertz or something like that.
That we can't
hear them, but we can perceive them, and they make us feel like haunted house.
That's wild.
Like it creeps us out on a preternatural level. You can induce feelings of fear and terror and panic by playing infrasound around people who can't even hear what it is, and now suddenly they're creeped out. And so there's all these perceptual
I don't want to know that.
factors in reality that we just don't pick up on. And so Hoffman says it's like we have this headset on. It's like a VR headset. And we only see the things that are within the VR headset, but reality is way bigger than that. And we don't perceive all the rest of what's going on. And so we have these limitations to our ability to perceive the real world. And there's stuff going on in the real world that we're just missing completely because we're not optimized for that.
Yeah. You know, I think of the, you know, the autistic child who,
it's a good example.
Has a different filter, right? And can't function, let's say, just using as a kind of made up example here, can't function throughout the normal course of a day because there's too much noise, either visual noise or sound noise. And with a simple adjustment to glasses or some sort of earphones or something, they can quiet themselves down and they can kind of operate. And yet the autistic, you know, that person then, because of their lack of filter, can see and hear things that you and I can't see. Like, that's weird.
Or they have capacities that,
that's what I mean.
Look at I don't know if people still use the word savant, but you look at these guys who are functionally unable to do much of anything, and then they can hand draw a photographic reproduction of an entire city after looking at it for 5 minutes. like, how is that even in the human brain? Where does that come from? There's just so much that we don't understand.
Yeah, like I remember there was a kid in the playground. Literally, his name was Joseph, and he, in retrospect, nobody knew what this was then. Of course, this is the mid '80s, but in retrospect, clearly severely autistic and a savant. And I remember one year went to a Catholic school, and we were the whole diocese was studying the Gospel of Luke. Right. And so every religion class, we would like go through a passage, and we were making our way through the whole thing. But Joseph could quote the whole thing, and you could literally walk up to him and say, "All right, Joseph, Luke chapter 3, verse 10." And he would just, and he could say it like Google.
Like eidetic memory actually exists. And it's
and like God is my witness, Joseph. And we sat there one day, and we like gave him all kinds of crazy, we would like open it up and track it along, and he would, and it was the translation that we all read, right? Remarkable. Like, what is that?
Yeah.
What is that?
But I mean, just think, like, for something to hide from us, all it has to do is know what our perceptual limitations are.
Just below the marker.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay. Like I'm going to just hang out in infrared. Like I'm cloaked in all spectrums of light, but infrared, and it's like, well, now you can't see me. And we have technological augmentations we can use, and like, oh, we can see you, but we have to know to look there. We have to know to put those goggles on. We have to know to change the filter. Right. And so there's all this stuff that could be going on that we have no idea is going on, and maybe it's been here all along, and we just didn't know how to look for it.
Yeah, right. And in going back to the sort of the mid-century, the mid 20th century spycraft angle of this whole thing is like, you look at the kind of things that the CIA learned how to do with, audio and frequency and masking, and the just incredible technical feats in pretty low tech ways. They were able to do all kinds of incredible things. And now we live in a the technological advances from 1950 to 1954 to 1924. It's like it's not even close.
And what we're doing now is even bigger. And so if you're looking for another potential catalyst in why maybe these things are escalating, AI, like what AI is enabling. I've been saying for 2 years before it got very obvious. I'm like, this is going to be the biggest technological development since nuclear weapons, and is potentially more impact.
Right.
It is to information technology what nuclear weapons were to geopolitics, and then some. But I mean, you look at things like they took an AI and they fed it the chemical formulas of a bunch of known substances that we have that we can produce, and they asked it come up with new uses for this, new compounds, and within minutes it comes up with like 400 new compounds that nobody's ever made, because we didn't think of those combinations, because it's incredible at pattern recognition.
It could be, and of course the tedium for the human mind essentially black boxes that.
We just hit walls and we can't.
You're like, but the machine don't care.
AI doesn't have writer's block. It never has, a creative misfire. Like, it just does it over and over and over again. And so then they feed that to a robotic, laboratory that's got, robot arms and all this stuff. And it starts synthesizing chemicals that have never been made before, that it figured out just looking at, whatever, bleach and all these different things that we have on the shelf. And it's like, we can make new stuff with this as new applications. And so there's just so much stuff that we think in our hubris that after 150 years or so of, high science, that like we've got it all figured out. But I mean, think back to like microbiology, Oliver Wendell Holmes, and he was trying to tell these doctors who were having puerperal fever, like the childhood bed death, the babies were dying and mothers were dying and they didn't know why. And he's like, you guys are doing autopsies in the morning and you're delivering babies in the afternoon, and you're not sanitizing your hands in between. And they're like, what does sanitizing your hands mean? Like, what is that? Why do we need to worry about that? And it's like, because they had no concept of microbiology. This was like 100 years ago.
Yeah.
And they were killing these women and killing these babies because they were infecting them with cadaver germs
with the
that
work
they didn't
that
even
they
know
had done in the
existed.
morning. Yeah.
But they considered themselves scientists. They didn't listen to him. They laughed him out of the room. Like, we already know all this stuff, you know?
Right.
We're facing the same thing now with physics, where we're like, these things don't adhere to the known laws of physics. And it's like, I mean, quantum physics is crazy.
Yeah, it's so weird. You know, I made this point. I'm teaching a course called 20th Century Humanities right now, which is kind of an attempt to think through a lot of this stuff that sort of bubbles up and emerges in the 20th century and of course and beyond, but just we keep it there. And you know, we make all these wacky advances in quantum mechanics, and we split the atom and weaponized it and dropped it, and it happened, right? These are facts.
Yeah,
these things happen. And you know, you talk to a physicist, you know, about quantum mechanics, and a rank and file normie just would think you were talking about
magic. Yeah, spooky action at a distance is one of the greatest descriptors ever.
Right.
But what is quantum entanglement, and how does it work?
Right.
And how can particles be an almost infinite distance apart but immediately communicate, which is breaking the light speed barrier? Right. Like, I mean, quantum teleportation literally breaks the light speed barrier, and nobody knows how it works.
Right. And so we know this, right? We collectively, like humanity, knows this, and yet we just pretend like we don't know it.
Yeah, and what's the observer effect? Like, why does the double slit experiment work the way that it does? Nobody knows. And it does. It feels like some kind of weird dark magic. And then you start to flip over into the lore about like Jack Parsons and the founding of the American space program. And the guy was all into the occult and sex magic, and he's friends with Aleister Crowley, or that thing I sent you about Cray, who invented the supercomputer, and he would go into a tunnel he built under his house and consult with elves. And that was where he got ideas for how to do this stuff.
Because that's what you do. You bury yourself down like a hobbit, and you talk to the elves so that you can make a mainframe. I mean, but Steve,
but Tim Taylor from Pasulka's books and his download protocol, where he does all this stuff and makes himself receptive, and ideas come to him from the outside. Yeah. That phenomenon is real, and we don't know what it is, and where is that stuff coming from?
Right. Okay. So this is all stuff like you and I do not have any special clearance or access to these things that everybody else, right? Everybody, and yet it's like this weird collective thud, like, yeah, I guess those things are kind of weird, whatever. And I'm, you know, thank God I have you in my life, because like when I get to these kind of moments, you know, I could say, Steve, I need to talk about this, because this is crazy town, you know, and it's not all in one like place.
Yeah.
You know, you go off and you do some of it over here, and you go over there, you do some of it over here. And, you know, you and I are these kind of weird aggregators where we're kind of like pulling these things in. And I don't know how this is not a bigger deal.
But we did the equivalent of changing the filters on our radar, right? Like we started to look at this stuff because we noticed something somewhere along the way that we're like, that's weird. And then we're like, I should look for that more. And if you're a pattern recognition person, which both of us are, it just starts to pop up. And then when you see it, you can't just ignore it. You file it. It's why I send you every time I come across one of these things. I'm like, look, this fits that pattern, you know, and it's because I don't know what to do with it. And I want somebody else's eyes on it. I want somebody else to tell me, what is this? And speaking of pattern recognition, by the way, I ran a bunch of this stuff from the hearing through ChatGPT today.
Oh, you did?
I was like, I took the Immaculate Constellation documents. Oh, we're now on a list. We're on
great name, by the way. Great name, by the way.
So, by the way, for people who don't know, and I actually asked ChatGPT to help me to summarize this accurately. So this is what ChatGPT says, how to quickly summarize what Immaculate Constellation is.
All right.
Immaculate Constellation is an alleged top secret U.S. government program focused on gathering and analyzing intelligence on unidentified anomalous phenomenon and advanced reproduction vehicles, ARVs. By the way, ARVs are supposedly the craft that human beings have made after reverse engineering non-human craft. So ARVs are alleged to exist. We don't know if they do. But insiders and whistleblowers have said, I mean, going back to Bob Lazar, I mean, one of the reasons why he was credible to a lot of people is because he took them out to Papoose Lake on certain days of the week when they supposedly tested out the craft that they were working on, and people could see him flying around. They filmed them on VHS cameras, and like, you know, it actually happened. The people who went there said they saw what he said that they were going to see. Yeah. So anyway, so ARVs, using specialized military sensors and surveillance assets, operating under a high level of secrecy, the program reportedly collects data from both tasked and untasked sources like satellites and advanced sensor arrays, and processes this information to monitor and assess the behavior, technology, and possible origins of these anomalous objects. It is described as a parent special access program with other highly compartmentalized child SAPs connected to it. So
child
it's basically
SAPs.
Yeah, so special access programs. So think of like when we were younger, they used to talk about Echelon. You remember that? Like it was supposedly this national security agency program called Echelon that was basically listening in on all communications all the time, looking for threats, looking for whatever, you know, compartmentalizing data, tracking it, tagging it, doing all this stuff, right? So they used to talk about Echelon. I think I know it was in a couple of spy movies, you know, it was cultural consciousness kind of a thing.
Yeah.
This is basically that, but for UAPs.
Right.
And so, and it's supposedly super secretive. You know, when Michael Schellenberger did his investigative report on this a couple weeks ago, when it came out, people immediately were like, you can get on a list. Like you will get on a government watch list if you mention these words in public, because nobody is supposed to know about this thing. And he broke it open. And then yesterday, Nancy Mace put it into the congressional record, and she put the document up. You can download it and you can read through it. And it actually goes through a number of different UAP types that they supposedly have video of, that they've tracked. He talked about it during the meeting yesterday about high definition video of glowing orbs coming out of the water next to a naval warship. Right. And then they disappear, and like all this stuff, like weird, wild stuff that you would say that's totally crazy. There's no way it's real. But there's this documentation of it, and there's serious journalists talking about it, and there's military people saying, yeah, it's real. And it's like, I don't know how we line up our filters, you know, the ones that keep us sane and keep us from going down every conspiracy theory rabbit hole. And then hey, these guys are credible. They have nothing to gain and everything to lose by doing this. They're putting themselves in danger by coming out with this information. What is the point of that psyop? If it's real, what does it do? Like if it's a psyop and it's meant to deceive us, to what end? What does it do for anybody to believe in all this weird crap that supposedly our military can't even deal with? Like why put that out there? What does that do for the public? Like I can't think of a plausible end game where it behooves the military industrial complex to be like, you know what, this stuff's out there, it's real, we don't have any ability to counter it or stop it, we don't know what it is. There's no benefit to seeding a false story out there about that I can see. And people will say, oh, it's distraction. There's way easier ways to distract people. That invite far fewer questions and now far fewer congressional hearings. Well, and what's really go ahead.
I was just saying distraction from what? Like
yeah. I don't know. I mean, they think it's distraction from corruption and all this kind of, but it's just too convoluted and complicated. Like Hanlon's razor comes in.
Right,
you know,
right.
Like, why are we doing this kind of stuff? There's way simpler ways to go about distracting people from scandals and from whatever else.
Right.
And what's really surprising, and I don't know that this was at all intentional about Trump's administration. Yeah. He's already picked 4 people for high-level positions who are on the record as serious UAP disclosure advocates. Right. Marco Rubio has talked about it. Right. I mean, that guy, I've never liked him, but he acted like he'd seen a ghost when he
I remember. Yeah, I remember you
just floored by it.
Yeah, we talked right after that, and I just remember like that bro got pilled, man. Like he did look like a different person.
Matt Gaetz, same thing. Like everybody says the guy's a slime ball or whatever. I don't know whether the allegations about him are true. You get a slimy kind of vibe off of him.
For sure.
But seeing him talk about UAPs and the videos that he saw at the Air Force base he went to down in Florida, and he's like, we don't have this stuff. I don't know what it is, but we don't have it.
Yeah.
You know, and then you have John Ratcliffe, who's now the CIA director, who has pushed and said there are way more sightings than have been reported. I mean, he's been on the news talking about UAPs. And then the last guy is Mike Waltz, who's the new director of national intelligence, I think. No, wait, that's Tulsi. He has another intelligence, national security advisor.
Security advisor, yeah. Whoa, which is
and he's been pushing for disclosure on this, and so we have this cabinet full of people who are now in positions potentially of power if they get approved or if they go through recess appointments,
right?
Who may actually be pushing for more of this stuff to come out. It's very strange.
Yeah, I think I'm gonna go in a little bit of a weird direction here.
Let's do it.
So bear with me. So I'm a big fan of this book by a Canadian philosopher called Charles Taylor called The Secular Age. And the book is about secularity, like what does secularism mean, et cetera, right? And any rate, at one point in the book, he says that, look, basically, 500 years ago, it was like basically impossible to believe, to be an atheist. And now 500 years later, like it's basically impossible to believe in God, roughly speaking, right? You're talking about in academic circles, et cetera.
Mm-hmm.
Right. At any rate, so like that's true, right? That's what secularism basically means for, the movement towards secularism basically means.
Okay. Does he explain the mechanism for the transition?
Oh yeah, the whole 700-page book is exactly.
Well, in a nutshell, what is it? Is it the shift to empiricism?
It's multifactorial, of course, but basically it becomes. He says it really becomes marked through the scientific revolution when you could prove whatever, that matter was inert, right? It matter's not enchanted.
Okay.
Stuff isn't, whatever. Okay.
Yeah.
So, but he says the sort of the medieval model, that begins to break down about 500 years is that we were fundamentally porous creatures, right? That we existed amidst a kind of spirit realm in which these both benevolent and malevolent spirits sort of had their way in and around and through you kind of at all times. And if you look at, medieval cosmology, you can clearly see that so much of prayer was about sort of inviting in the good so as to ward off the bad. But there was no like protective layer. That gets gradually and then quickly swapped out for what he calls the buffered self. And so that we are buffered in into ourselves, right? That there's no porosity, right? Nothing can get in and out. As we are just who we are. We have a kind of buffered layer around the self, right? And that has been incredibly powerful, as you can see through the scientific revolution and all of that. And what you are describing and what I'm reading about dimensions and phenomena and experiencers and technology and breaking down the laws of physics, it's as if we are now past the buffered self again and back to a new version of the porous self. And I don't know what to do with that.
Is it cyclical? Is it a pendulum?
That's a good question.
Or is it kind of one of these like a level up thing, right? You have a spiritual, act, and then act 2 is an empirical act, and then you get to a certain point, and it goes to that Arthur C. Clarke, the famous phrase of any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic, right?
From magic, which
so you get to a point where like you start out empirically and you start explaining a bunch of things, and you start, we understand why this happens in the world. We get this, and we get that, and we get this, and then you plateau again where you're like, we don't have any more answers for the things that we're looking at.
That's interesting.
And then our attempts to advance through that become almost magic. I mean, ChatGPT is magic. I talk to the damn thing every day, and it gets smarter and smarter, and it gives better and better answers. But what's almost weirder is the stuff that it imagines and the stuff that it gets wrong and the hallucination. And I ask it for a transcript of a photograph of a document because I don't want to type it all up.
Yeah.
And it gives me a summary instead, and it's missing pieces. It's like, here's your transcript. And I'm like, that doesn't look unabridged. And it's like, oh, you know what? You're right. I guess I was having a problem with that. And then it tries to do it again. And through the course of the interaction, you get this feeling of this is totally non-empirical. This is not something that I can count on. I have to double check this. And it's almost like talking to a spirit box. Like, you don't know, like, what's in there, what's making that stuff happen, what's making it work. So I feel like there's this cyclical thing that kind of happens there. Well, but I don't know.
No, that's good. That's good. That's definitely going to give me something to chew on here. But what's interesting about the buffered, what's interesting about the porous self and then the buffered self, right, is that this is in many respects independent of Christianity, right? So it's not like Christianity gives us this notion of the porous self.
No.
And then
that's ancient, right?
Oh gosh, yeah. Like it's way, you know, let's just put it this way. This little 500-year window of time in which we are the inheritors of is totally novel.
And even with growing atheism, the majority of human beings on this planet have some spiritual belief.
Correct. Right. Because I used to think that atheism correlated with materialism. Right. But it's not true. It's not true. At least, you know, if you look at the survey data, right, that they operate in kind of two different levels, right? That more atheists believe in ghosts, you know, more people believe in ghosts than are atheists. Whatever. There's some. I'm not framing it correctly, but or there's a large percentage of atheists who believe in ghosts, right? So there's that sense that an atheist is not necessarily a materialist, strictly speaking. They just don't believe in the sky daddy type thing, right?
Yeah.
And so this is an ancient thing. And so if you hear somebody like C.S. Lewis talk about, you know, the discarded image, right, that what modernity did was to discard. I'm mashing things together here.
That's okay. This is where the good stuff happens. Let's struggle through this.
Yeah. So that what happens with the discarded image of this sort of fully integrated sacramental spirit and flesh and matter and enchantment world, right? This sort of magic world. What the discarded image does is that it becomes extremely powerful because you do the equivalent of closing one eye. So if I've closed this eye off to all things metaphysical, now all I have to deal with is the immanent and the material. Well, it's super powerful because I can manipulate material in profound ways so as to become, you know, masters and possessors of nature, as Descartes prophesied. But so we tend to think of that as like that's an advancement, but we still got this other eye.
Mm-hmm.
And so what we're finding out here at the tail end of modernity and now into whatever this new thing is, you know, is that we have this other eye that is detecting all kinds of information that we simply have ignored. We have told ourselves that it doesn't exist, but really the model is that we have ignored this. Now I'm thinking here of the shrimp that you were talking about earlier, right?
Yeah.
I'm thinking here of these other creatures who can see and hear things that we human beings can't hear. They're seeing something real, right? They're registering something real. And so you were talking about that music frequency that we can't hear yet it affects us.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if what we're kind of butting up now against is that the whole idea of the buffered self is a powerful fiction and that the more true version is the porous version. Now, as you know, as a Catholic, I have no basic problem with this, right? I mean, but as a modern, sure as hell I do.
Yeah. Right? Well, I mean, look, it's difficult, right? But I mean, the reason why I say that leaving Catholicism left me in a position of agnosticism rather than atheism is
right.
There's just too much weird stuff in the world that I can't explain. And so I question and doubt the theology. I question and doubt the stories because they don't seem to either match experience or they seem illogical to me in certain ways. But it's like, I've had too many experiences with the woo and the weird to say that that's not there. Right. And it's uncomfortable to not have the answers, but it is a better place for me right now because now I'm asking questions that I wouldn't have asked before.
Yeah, that's right.
The problem was I thought I had all the answers because religion was like, here it is, serve it to you on a platter, look it up in the catechism, look it up in Dunziger.
Boom,
you know, here's Thomas says this. I'm like, yeah, Thomas says a lot of things. But
we're done now. We're done now. Yeah,
but
right.
I don't want to ever be back to that place, you know. Right, and I am very open to returning to religion because I do not consider myself a buffered self in that way.
Right,
maybe I'm more buffered than people who are more open to it, but it's like I'm not going to close the door on any of that stuff because there is a lot of stuff we just don't get about what's going on.
So one of the constant things that you and I text back and forth to one another is the need for epistemic humility, right?
Mm-hmm.
That what we have learned in these various rabbit holes, the stuff that we've been reading and experiencing, is that number one, it's weirder than we ever think, and number two, there's just stuff that you can't quite account for, but you know it's there, or you know it's true, right? And so that's just such an important thing. And I think one of the reasons why you chafed so hard against tradism, which eventually led to your sort of your unraveling, is because tradism, the great promise of tradism is that it simplifies things down to like its manipulable core, right? So I always think of it this way, right? You know, the fraction 5/10, right? There's nothing wrong with 5/10, but every mathematician will tell you have to reduce to its core, right? So we got to get to that 1/2 thing all the time. But that 1/2, you know, this is where my brain goes. It's like, yeah, but you had 5 10s.
Yeah.
You know, like there were 10 things over there and you had 5 of them or something, right? It's like those are not there, right?
Yeah.
And I get it. So 1/2 is sort of the jig that you use in order to manipulate and to move things around. It's super powerful, right? I grant all of that. But I wonder.
I mean, imagine that Picard scene if 4 lights were on.
That's right.
But there were a total of 8. Yeah. And he was like, there are 2 lights.
Yeah. Right. So
I mean, those 4 lights matter because it's like there's something that's real there. Yeah. You can't reduce things to a mathematical.
Right. And I would tell you, you know, we've had this conversation, but I would tell anybody who would dare to listen to me, and there's still a few people listen to us, right? That if your religion forces you to reduce the irreducible, it's lying to you. And it might be convenient, and it might be helpful, for instance, to just dismiss all this stuff as demons.
Mm-hmm.
Helpful how? And for what? So you can go about your day and go to work.
I had one guy at one point flat out admit to me that his soteriology could not admit of another intelligent race that falls outside the redemption narrative that we know, that is Jesus became a man and died for all men and only for men. And so if there's some other intelligent race out there that, you know, doesn't fit within that narrative, then how does that make anything work in terms of salvation? And, you know, and he was like, so I cannot afford to believe that could possibly be true.
Right. But so therefore you've just then given up on truth and
I'm just like, wouldn't you want to know what's true and then adjust your theology accordingly? Like, wouldn't you be like, okay, well, now we've got a new factor in this data set and we've got to take it into account. Like, we can't just push it off to the side and pretend that it doesn't exist. If you do that in chemistry, you do that in physics, you're going to blow something up. Like, you got to know all the variables.
That's right.
And so I don't understand that approach to things. Yeah. And I think atheists and religious people both do it.
Right. Well, you know,
for their own reasons, but it's because this doesn't fit within my understood known set of factors in the universe.
Right.
And I have a locked down set. And I'm not, this is outside of that. And that doesn't work for me because then I got to rejigger everything. And I don't want to do that.
Right.
And it's overly simplistic.
Right.
But I don't know. I mean, I understand that it's scary, but I don't know why people want to do that. It's the blue pill. It's Cypher going back into the matrix, eating the steak and going, ignorance is bliss.
Did you see? I was tweeting about that today.
I actually did.
Yeah. I've been tweeting about it all morning long. You know, and then, you know, it's like, God, it's so frustrating, right? Because the first movie was so good, and it was good because it was properly vague, and then they had to go make the second one, and then they had to go make the third one, and then they had to make the fourth one, and they just shat over the entire series.
Yeah.
Because they don't know what they don't know, and like, fine. But it's like,
and then after all that, they had to retcon it into a trans story, which it wasn't in the beginning.
It was not.
And even they admitted that it wasn't. They just were like, well, it was inherent in us, so it was probably inherent in the story.
Yeah, which is artistic. It's a major violation of the act of the creation of art. But
that first movie really was a paradigm breaking kind of, like, it was perfect.
Yeah.
I mean, even if it was Alice in Wonderland reimagined, like, it was still in a modern idiom.
Well, in a modern idiom, it picked up all of the ancient patterns and sort of made you reconsider it, which is brilliant. It's perfect, right? It's great. Okay. But anyway, it goes back to Cypher, right? And it's like, I guess more people than I want to have. How do I phrase this? I want to live in a world in which I believe that most people would prefer reality to the fake thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm wondering if maybe I'm the weirdo.
No, but I think we are, because the fake thing is more comforting. It's less challenging. It's less exhausting. It doesn't keep you up at night wondering what the heck is really going on.
Yeah.
It's, the blue pill is attractive when you're exhausted and you're tired of fighting. You're like, I don't want to know anymore.
Right.
Like, I wish I'd never found this out, because it's made my life so much more complicated. I mean, my life would have been, in some respects, so much easier to not reach the crisis of faith that I reached.
For sure. In almost every way, right? In almost every way.
Yeah. I mean, I was unhappy. I was miserable because of things that were there. It was like, as I wrote about the other day, it's kind of like walking on a broken bone that didn't set correctly. Like, I needed to re-break it, right? I needed to go through this gutting and stripping and everything so that I could fix my broken epistemology.
Right.
So that I could gain that epistemological humility, because I didn't have it, because the faith was presented to me as, here are the answers, and I wanted the answers so bad.
Yeah, but you were as good, if not better, than Chat GPT when it came to those things. I mean, that's the truth.
But I realized that I couldn't Chat GPT my own questions anymore.
That's right.
Then, like, it broke down.
Your core. That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
I was like, these answers that I have in me are not sufficient for the questions that are arising in my mind, and I don't know where to chase that down, except for wherever it leads me.
And the phenomena that you experience.
Yeah.
Right. It's like, but that's why those kind of ossified ideologies just in the end don't work.
But I think people like us, and I don't want to speak for you, but I think that we are enough of like mind on this, that with all the misery and suffering that life entails, and we've both had our heavy doses in our own ways.
Yeah.
Like, one of the things that makes me want to just stay alive is there are so many questions I want answers to, and I want to get those, like, before I go. I wish I had another lifetime to live, because I didn't start asking the right questions until I was in my 40s, and I wish I'd asked them 20 years ago, because there's so much I want to know, and I need time. I need time to pursue it. I need time to figure it out.
Well, the tough thing, of course, is that in many respects it can behave like a curse. And if you look, as my mind always does, I always go back to old books and old stories and old poems and the like. And, in many respects, the quest is a curse, right? You look at something like the Rime of the Ancient Mariner, and the mariner has this insane and otherworldly experience of the realm of the spirit. And that's what, the only thing you can kind of call it. And he then has to roam the earth looking for the next person to tell the truth to, and nobody wants to hear it.
It's Plato's cave, right?
Right.
People who leave.
That's right. So that's this weird kind of pattern, that that keeps repeating itself. And I think, and I know this conversation has morphed from the sort of original conversation about the hearings and the UAPs, but it's connected, right? I mean, it's connected in a very real way, because we're confronted with a whole host of experiences and accounts and phenomena that we just can't pretend isn't out there.
It goes back to that clip I sent you this afternoon of Robert Bigelow.
Yeah.
And he's being asked by the news reporter, you know, like, where are these aliens? Like, where are we looking for them? And he just laughs and he's like, they're everywhere you look. They're right under your nose. You just don't know what you're looking at. And I don't know what the hell that meant.
Right. And which is so weird. Like, so when you said that to me today, I was thinking of the Rime of the Ancient Mariner, and there's this great edition of the poem. It's illustrated. You know that illustrator Gustave Doré. He goes,
I love.
Yeah,
he
so
does
amazing.
The best illustrations. The Divine Comedy. Yeah,
exactly. Just amazing. Anyway, he has this amazing edition of the Rime of the Ancient Mariner, and there's this incredible picture of the Ancient Mariner, and he's there on the deck of this ghost ship, and and every square inch of airspace around him is filled with all of these spirits that are kind of floating all around him and swarming all around him. And then, like, the next pic, they're all gone. You know, and so that's the image that I get when with this quotation from Bigelow. You know, they're just right under your nose. You just can't see them.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, I mean, and you know, to go back to the spiritual experiences that keep me from being an atheist, I mean, they were always more profoundly from the dark side than the light.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
But I mean, I'm thinking of somebody I knew who always was able to sense the spiritual realm, and when they converted, they would tell me every day, I see demons. I see them on people. I see them in people. Like, you can tell, I can smell what their sins are, and it's freaking me the hell out.
Wow.
You know, and those stories were just crazy, because it was like, some people, they're just nearby. Some people, they're like wrapped around their body, but they're on the outside. They're not on the inside. Some people, when they talk, all I can see is the demon, like, using their face as a puppet, you know, and these aren't experiences that I had, but they were walking through the world every day, and they're like, I don't even want to leave my apartment. I don't want to go outside because I don't want to see this crap.
Right.
Because it's horrifying.
And you can imagine, you can imagine that there's like a filter, over your eyes, like a pair of glasses. You could put on these kind of glasses that shut out all X, right? Then you can see Y and Z, right? Or vice versa. It's like
X-ray specs,
Yeah, right. And it's like, you can imagine, like, this person, like how do you take that filter off, right? I mean, how do you negate? Because it's
and over time for them, it faded away, and they stopped seeing it all the time. But in the beginning, it was like when they first, first ripped that Band-Aid off, it was like, wow, it's everywhere I look. And that's what I think of when you talk about the Rime of the Ancient Mariner. It's that same thing. They're all there. They're
right. And it's important, of course, to note that like all those spirits surrounding the mariner, like, it's not a pleasant thing. Like, this is not something you want to be fair, and I think you're right, that this is the one of the issues that I have with people talking about reenchantment, and I get it. Rod's book is great. Everybody should read it. But there's a dark side, and Rod will talk about this too, but there's a dark side to all this sort of reenchantment talk, because people want to think about enchantment as like, oh, like nice little angels, and we can kind of like float around. But there's this whole layer of malevolence that we are just not prepared to even consider. And I don't know, man, that stuff's real.
And there's stuff that you're grateful that you have a filter for. You don't want to see everything. You don't want to know everything because it's too much, and you don't know how to handle it. Nobody has a guidebook for that stuff.
Right.
And
so you're granted, at times you're granted, gifted, an ability to sense them, to see them, to feel them, to hear them. But, sometimes,
and nobody tells you why. I mean, the people who have this, they don't know why.
Right.
This person that I'm thinking of, they saw these things from the time they were a little kid. They thought everybody did. And then as they got older, they realized, okay, it's not normal for everybody to see.
But to me,
they would see ghosts, and they would see everything. And it would just be like, it was crazy unnerving for a child to go through that and not to understand. And they never understood why. To this day, they don't understand why they saw all those things.
Well, but it's interesting. I was talking with Rod the other day. He came on the live stream a couple of weeks ago. And, we were talking about, like, he's a super taster. Like, he has this, he has this sort of like a hyper ability to taste and to differentiate. Most people don't. Right. And so, look, and Rod's not the only. I mean, this is not just him. I mean, this is like an actual thing. You can look it up on the internet. I swear.
So you mean these sommeliers aren't making up all the stuff, in the wine?
Right. Correct. Right. Well,
yeah, it tastes like bubblegum in an old tire. I'm like, no, it doesn't. It just tastes like every other wine that's in this category.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, I am not a super taster. I mean, I like taste, but I'm not a super taster.
Yeah,
but we know that these kinds of things, these kind of people exist. I mean, like, people have perfect pitch. Like, what the hell? Like that's weird. So we know that there are all these kind of phenomena that we can't account for, and they're all about perceptions and filters and ability to sort of see and apprehend and attend, and we're not all the same. There's this vast wide spectrum that we can all basically attend to, but there are these weird things on the fringes on the left and the fringes on the right and the fringes above and the fringes below that there are too many accounts to simply discount. Right.
No, I agree.
Yeah. All right. Well, look, I have to, as my friend Pastor Paul Vanderclay would say, land the plane. Got to go and attend to family business. So this has been amazing, Steve. So I wanted actually to open it up to Q&A, but I don't have time today, sadly.
Come on. We got to squeeze them in. Come on.
All right, well, let's see what we got.
All along from far away, he smelled good things to eat, and he got into the boat.
All right, email, let's see. Oh, Hillary's on the chat.
We have been neglecting the chat.
I have. I had to ignore it for a while because some people were killing me in the chat.
You need an assistant.
I know. I need a Jamie. Wouldn't it be having a Jamie would be amazing. I've always kind of wanted to be Jamie. I think Jamie would be a lot of fun to be.
Joe Rogan's Jamie.
Yes, that's what I'm talking about. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, you not. I
was like, wait.
Yeah. No, I meant Joe Rogan's. All right. Is the Flagstone theory actually fake?
I actually don't know what that is.
Yeah, I don't either. Sorry. I thought we would have had you covered. Any questions in the chat? We still have we have 329 people in the live chat, Steve Skojec. That's pretty cool.
That's pretty neat. Oh, it's a good topic. It's an interesting topic.
Yeah, I should have built it more. I thought we were going to talk a little bit about the election and all this sort of stuff, but we went right to where I really wanted to go.
You pulled my string on the rabbit hole thing that I spent so much time with.
Well, it's about time. I mean, we've been talking about this forever offline. So, all right, I'm not getting any questions in the chat. Let me just double check to make sure. We'll get some things rejected. All right. No, man, nothing.
We missed the window.
I guess we missed this. We missed the window. What I should have done is I should have said, 20 minutes ago, hey, like we'll be wrapping this up shortly. If you've got any questions, put them in the chat and we'll do all of that. So, all right. Well, look, Steve, what did it feel like to get back in the saddle, man? This is great.
It feels good. I mean, I did a podcast the other day, but I did it solo. So
I know
the conversations are nice because they're all they just happen so much more organically.
Yeah, right. I have. It's funny, just a quick note. I teach, as you know, and I create content every day, right? But there's something about getting in front of this and there's nobody else around. It's like it's such a weird thing. Julian, if you got to go put in the chat. I want to hear Kale expand on his theory on Twitter of Trump's picks. Oh, okay. All right, I'll do that.
What did you say about that?
I basically said that I look, I have no inside knowledge. I'm just watching like everybody else. But based upon what I know about the first Trump transition, and I have people who worked in it. So I know people who worked in the Trump transition in 2016. Mm-hmm. And from what I heard from them, and then a couple of his colleagues, that it was a shitstorm from like today, like the day after the election, that the entire apparatus of what he came to call the deep state, but it wasn't even really the deep state, but the entire apparatus immediately put the entire administration on their back foot with the whole Russia thing. And it was on the inside, from the outside it was all crazy, but from the inside it was particularly crazy. And so my theory about what he's doing, notice how systematic Trump has been in his administration, his team has been in the last 6, 7, 4, 5, 6 days of every day. There's 1, 2, 3 being rolled out. And then the Gates thing came out yesterday. And I think that the Gates appointment, or the announcement of the Gates appointment, is a way of setting the edge, right? If Trump can get him through, which I doubt it, he can, it's sort of it's an offensive counterpunch to what is going to come, what is happening. But if he doesn't, Gates becomes the kind of sacrificial victim that will then allow other picks that might have been edge cases without Gates' nomination.
Like, I had this thought that he's the Hegelian antithesis, right?
Yeah.
Like, but I don't know that that's true, because I think that Trump values loyalty more than anything right now.
So my tweet was it's a win-win, right?
Yeah.
He likes Gates clearly, because I went to DC 2 years ago, went to one of those dinners, one of those things, and Gates was there. And this was at a very low time in sort of the Trump world. I mean, this was after January 6th. It was, he's got no chance. Now we've got all these lawsuits. And so there was zero to gain by being pro-Trump at this moment. Mm-hmm. And there was Gates, and he was like, he had his MAGA badge on, and he was talking about Donald J. Trump, and he was like all in. So I think you're right. I think that, Trump loves a loyal guy. Gates has been super duper on that front.
Well, I also saw somebody saying that, everybody else who was lobbying to get the attorney general job was talking about their jurisprudence and their, legal experience and all this stuff. And Gates just came in and was like, I'll go and start cutting off effing heads.
That's right.
And that's what Trump wants, because the DOJ and the intelligence communities have been coming at him for 8 years, and they've been trying to destroy him. And he wants loyalists who are going to go in, and they're going to push back, and they're going to rip it up, and they're going to disrupt. And that's what he's doing with every one of these picks. He's bringing in people that the establishment insiders who watch Washington are going, this is a terrible pick. This is not somebody who's qualified for the job. And it's like, that's what he wants. He wants somebody who isn't already beholden to the status quo.
Yeah. Right. I think that's exactly right. And so that's what I mean. It's what I meant earlier, that rather than sort of floating, see if we can get this guy through, or he's not thinking in those terms. At least it doesn't appear to me, that he's like, we'll find one that we can get through. I think he's throwing punches,
And what's weird to me is actually the time I've spent studying the UAP issue has shown light on what the deep state does and how it does it.
Yeah.
How these unelected bureaucrats behind the scenes that have access to deep piles of money and have access to mechanisms of power can get in and absolutely control narratives, can work against a sitting president, within his own administration, and undermine him and create hoaxes and do all this
real
stuff.
power. It's real power, Steve.
It's the same thing that they're doing to the people who are trying to do disclosure. They're trying to make them look like idiots and liars and all this kind of stuff. And the intelligence agency work against him has been unreal. And the former deputy director of the FBI came out today and was like, he's just coming after and trying to destroy, the FBI. And it's like, you guys have been trying to destroy him nonstop.
That's right. And that's the part, that I think your rank and file normie on the left and the right, to be fair, just does not see that, or refuses to acknowledge that's a part of the reality of Washington, D.C., that this blob, the machine, whatever you want to call it, right? That's a real thing, and again, I'm talking to people who have worked in the administration, who were part of the transition team, who stayed close, and they'll tell you that, no one was treated the way that Trump was treated by the entrenched bureaucity of DC.
They took advantage of the fact that he didn't know anything about governance. Because
he said that, right? If you listen to his Rogan podcast, which I thought was really very good, by the way, he's like, look, he said I didn't know what I was doing.
And Bobby Kennedy said he's had that same conversation with him, and he got hoodwinked by lobbyists and people that he thought he could trust, and they were just all gunning for their own agendas. And so now this time he's had time to think about it, and he's coming back with a plan.
Yeah, look, and in many respects, I mean, I've seen people say this, and you and I had actually said it before we saw it on Twitter, but it's like, they should have just let him have his second term.
No, I really believe, and this is something that I haven't expounded on much yet, but I've been thinking about it a lot. Like, you wouldn't have gotten the mandate that he just got if he'd gotten his second term. Second term would have probably been almost as ineffectual as
totally agree. 100%.
But
so this just
everything that they have done over the last 4 years have pushed normies over the edge, and they're like, no, we're not doing this anymore.
Right.
And you're seeing exponential increases in minority voting. Like, they go from 5% to 10% for Trump. Like, it's happening at an exponential rate.
It's ridiculous. And it explodes so many of the stupid little memes and the stupid little jigs, of, racist, white supremacy, all those stupid things.
AOC dropped her pronouns out of her bio today.
Get out of the really?
Yeah.
Really?
People are lambasting her for it, but like, they're realizing that the woke thing has no currency anymore. Wow. Everyone's sick of it.
But I'll tell you, I won't crack out the champagne just yet, because I think you and I are pretty black-pilled, but I mean, we really underestimate how deep those claws are into the managerial state. It's so entrenched, it's so real, it's so big. So I mean that's a great sign, though. That's a great sign.
Arguably they killed JFK over it, right? I mean, he wanted to take out the intelligence agencies because he saw that they were out of control.
Right. Yeah. And boy, I tell you, I cannot believe 10 years ago, there's no way I would even entertain this idea. There's just no way. But I think what we, thanks, Chris. I think that's what has changed me. I was so normie. I really was, man. I was like, a kind of comfortable right of center guy, like but what we've been through in the last decade, the whole I had my uncle, he's deceased, Uncle Jimmy. He's a great guy, weird guy, but anyway, he was a big time lefty, big time lefty. Big influence on me when I was a kid, so, and he would always just go on about the CIA and and always just be like, oh God, Uncle Jimmy, can you just drop it with the damn CIA thing already? And I just, and now here I am, you read something like Chaos, you read about, Project Blue Book, etc., MK
Ultra,
like those are real things, right? And like on the record, like those happened, right?
Yep.
And once you sort of flip your frame that way, you simply can't look at any of these idiots on Twitter like I used to look at. I used to look up to some of these guys, and you know what I mean? It's like
I'm just laughing at his comment about Blue Beam.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. You need to meet Grizz. He's the best. He's like he's my boy. You and he would be fast friends. No, but it's just like, what we were taught about the 20th century is just not true.
Yeah.
Right? And one of the reasons why, and you really saw that like with that Martyr Maid guy, when he was talking about Churchill as the, and again, I don't agree with that, but just like to touch the third rail, of, that perfect, white hats and perfect black hats, don't exist, was enough to like blow him up and attempt to unperson him. I was just really
I mean, I don't know who it was. I'm trying to remember who it was that said it. It might have been Ross Coulthart, but somebody was talking about during World War II, the American government still believed that it was important to be honest with the people. So they would keep things secret, like the D-Day invasion. They wouldn't tell anybody. But then once, the operation was complete, whatever the operation was, they would make an announcement. And they would say, this is what we did. This is how we went about it. But it was right around the time of the Manhattan Project that they started to realize there's stuff we have to keep secret, and we're going to do whatever we have to do to keep it secret. We're going to lie, we're going to cheat, we're going to kill, we're going to steal, we're going to do whatever. And this created the monster that ended up being the CIA and the other intelligence agencies, where like there just weren't any rules. Like they just did whatever it was that they felt like they needed to do, and they knew better than the American people what needed to be done. And it was no longer government by, for, and of the people.
That's right.
We didn't need to know.
That's right. That's exactly right.
They knew better than us.
And that's the turn, right? To me, like that's the turn. That's why, you hear me say all the time, the mid-century is where all the bodies are buried, right? Because there's a discernible, the monster we had, the monster, what was necessary to defeat the monster of the Axis powers compelled us to become a monster of which we have never ceased being.
Yeah. And Paul Johnson's argument at the opening of Modern Times that special relativity actually turned into moral relativity.
That's right.
If space and time were relative, then everything is.
Yeah. Such a great turn. That's a great opening chapter. He's talking about Paul Johnson, a book called Modern Times. It's basically a history of the 20th century. And he has this opening vignette. He talks about Einstein, and there's this moment about a decade after he publishes his theory on relativity, in which they could run an experiment with an eclipse that proved it, right? And his point was there were a number of different points that he bears there, but culturally, what this meant, even though Einstein thought this was ridiculous, is that very quickly people turned that into a kind of meme. Well, if time and space are relative, then so is morality, right? And that's such a crucial turn that really opens up the 20th century, right? So then I think why you're saying that, Steve, is that if you have to do really, really bad things to beat the Nazis, let's say, then what are you going to do?
Yeah, because modern problems require modern solutions.
I mean, look, the ad copy writes itself.
Yeah.
And we never retired the dragon, right? We are the dragon in many.
And it's weird. I told you earlier in the show that I went recently to the Udvar-Hazy Air and Space Museum, the one at Dulles, not the one downtown in DC.
I've never
been there. So I've been there a ton of times because I used to live right near there, but it was weird going back, having been there so many times, and I don't know what's changed in me since the last time I was there.
Yeah, right.
I walked up to the Enola Gay. The plane that dropped the first atomic bomb, and I got choked up. I was like, you talk about, matter being inert or being enchanted. But there is an enchantment on that.
Yeah, exactly. It's
but
sacred.
not like. But
not
I'm like,
good,
this is the plane that killed 140,000 people.
That's right.
And I'm sitting here looking at it, and it's like this. It's like getting one of the Infinity Stones sitting in front of you. I mean, it's like the power that this thing has. And it leaves a mark on it that you can't see, but I could feel it. And I was like, I was in tears a little bit. I was like, this is really powerful.
Yeah. This is one of those things like Peterson will talk about this, right? Like Elvis's guitar, right? Elvis's
Paul Vanderklay, Jen
PVK. It's like Elvis's guitar, right? And I'll run this, it's like, what is it about picking up the guitar that Elvis played? I can buy the same model, right? I can go to the Gibson factory and get the exact same model with the exact same specs and the exact same strings. And why is it that when I pick up Elvis's guitar, it's a different experience?
Yeah.
Like, what is that? Right. And so the Enola Gay is like this, it housed the dark holy, it's wild.
Yeah.
All
I know you have to go.
I really do have to go. Dang it. I was hoping we'd get to hour 3.
We'll just do it again.
We're practicing for our Rogan stamina. We got a good solid.
People don't realize we just do this on the phone.
Right. So we
might as well capture it.
Yeah, we really should make it a habit to do it for real. So look, what I really want to do with you next time is I want to go into the sort of the tech Gnostic woo stuff.
Okay. We're gonna have to prep the ground for that. So
that's fine.
I know what to talk about.
Yeah, but this weird sphere where the Gnostic tech morphs into the paranormal.
The machine spirits.
Yeah, I that's where I want to go. I mean,
do I have to reread that Hideous Strength before
we do that funny. Show? I just finished Paralandra with my kids, and we start that Hideous Strength the week after Thanksgiving, so maybe we'll have to hold off on that one. But yeah, we the creators the creators of Nice are still amongst us, I'm afraid.
Yeah, I mean, I read that book it's probably been almost 20 years. And it was very unnerving at the time, especially because I loved the first 2 books.
Yeah.
And then I hit that one and it was jarring. And I was like, I don't know what to make of this, but it was so before its time that it's like, now it feels like it just slots right into where we are in history.
Well, I mean, full disclosure, I read it as a college student when I was a sophomore, maybe. So I read it around I was 20 and hadn't really thought much of it. And I reread it in the middle of COVID, and it really got me through COVID. Like it was this weird. It was this weird sort of thing. I'm like, Hale, you should pick up That Hideous Strength. And, I'm reading it. I'm like, this sounds very like right now almost. And anyway, no, it really got me through COVID, gave me some eyes to see. So no, I'm really looking forward to rereading it with the kids. I'm rereading it with my students in 2 weeks. So that should be.
Hillary said she just finished it. And
oh, no way. Hey, Hillary.
Now.
Yeah, it's, that is, I think you're right, Hillary. I think it's, and man, like there are these little bits of conversation that are in it that, you could go on Twitter and hear right now, like today, it's really quite something. All right. Well, look, Steve, let's land the plane. Thank you so much. I really, this is audience. You should know that this is probably like 2 and 3 years of me trying to prod Steve to come back on. So I take it as an honor, Steve, that you decided to come into the Underneath and explore these things with me. There's plenty more to explore. Steve writes at the Skojec File. You should go check out his Substack. He always writes great stuff. And I predict that he is sort of rebooting his own podcast. So you should check that out as well.
Yeah, I've got one solo episode done, but we'll be doing more. And I'll do solos until I figure out who to have on and what to talk about. But I'm just trying to, like you said, get back in the saddle and get on camera again and all that stuff.
All right.
It's a natural medium when I'm there, but I avoid it like the curmudgeon that I am until the lights and the camera are on.
That's so on brand. That's so on brand. All right. Well, I'm gonna kick you out of the studio. Stick around. I'll be back in a second. All right, folks. Thank you so much for popping into the Underneath. I know it's a little bit of a last second thing, but thank you for coming. And until next time, keep asking questions. Cheers.